Alrighty, a very good morning and a warm welcome in joining us for the President's Design Award 2023 Jurors Forum. This is jointly organized by DesignSingapore Council and the Urban Redevelopment Authority and is part of the PDA Creating a Better World by Design series. So my name is Juliana Yao and I am your MC for today. Some of the most influential names in design have gathered in Singapore for a week for this PDA 2023 jury session to select the recipients of the nation's highest design honor. These recipients will be announced at the award ceremony at the Astana in July. So we are honored to have our distinguished jurors join us as part of a panel here today. Unfortunately, our speakers, Mr. 𝗘𝗅𝗽𝗀𝗃𝗃 and Mr. Mayan Song, will not be able to join us today, so we do apologize for any inconvenience caused, and we appreciate your understanding. For BOA and SIA members, there will be 6 CPD points accredited to members who have registered and stayed until the end of this forum. So please do stay all the way today to fill in a survey form with your details to qualify for your CPD points. Throughout the session, you may also send in your questions for the Q&A segment. You'll see the QR code over there. Please feel free to scan it, and you might just have your questions answered during the Q&A segment later on as well. And for now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to invite architect 𝗂𝗶𝗲𝗍𝗍, Group Director of the Architecture and Urban Design Group at Urban Redevelopment Authority, to give her welcome remarks. Architect 𝗂𝗑, please.
Good morning, distinguished speakers, friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the President Design Award Jurors Forum, and we are very happy to have everybody here in URA today. My young son likes to, come and explore, the city gallery. He thinks I have a very fun job, whole day I'll be playing with models, doing sketchings, drawings. And I explained to him that, we have to form tech teams, we have to work across and get everybody to come together and aim to design our city to be a great place to live, work, and play in. Well, today, we are living in a world where, challenges, as you know, are becoming more complex than ever. And design has a crucial role to play in addressing these issues. And the theme of this forum is called, Creating a Better World by Design. And this could not have been more timely and relevant, for our times. So we are very honored, today to have some of the most inspiring and knowledgeable individuals, across the different disciplines to share their insights on sustainable cities and human experience design. So on the macro level, as a city, right, it is beyond about, carbon emission, saving energy. It is also about how the buildings are designed to come together, the spaces between the buildings, and how people move through the spaces. Right, on the individual and community level, it is about, how do we design spaces that we love, spaces that will inspire us, and also meeting our needs, and basically the places that we call home. So therefore, through the exchange today, we hope to gain an understanding on how we can create different quality spaces, that we have for us. So just as my young son is learning, new things about the world every day, even myself, as a designer and architect, we relearned, we embrace new tools, we work and collaborate and seek out partnerships, with the different expertise, across the different fields of expert. So I hope, we embrace the opportunity this morning to share, to learn and exchange, between the different designers, and collectively together we can and we hope to create a better world for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Architect 𝗂𝗑. I would now like to invite Ms. Dawn Lim, Executive Director of DesignSingapore Council, to give her welcome remarks as well. Ms. Lim, please.
Good morning, everyone. Professionally, I am known as Dawn Lim, Executive Director of the DesignSingapore Council. It's a mouthful. But outside my professional role, I wear another hat. I am simply Dawn. I'm a daughter, I'm a caregiver to my late mother, who was a stroke patient and wheelchair-bound for more than a decade. And every time we wanted to go out of the house, I would have to meticulously plan our route to find the most accessible way. We have a great public transport system, but public transport for us was out of the question because trying to get from our home to the nearest bus stop or MRT station is an obstacle course in itself if you're in a wheelchair. So we had to drive. And most of the time we ended up in our malls to escape the heat and the warmth outside. This was also a time before our extensive park connectors came up. If you've ever been to our malls, and all of you, some of you have designed it, all of you have visited it, especially our heartland malls, the most direct way anywhere inside the mall is actually the least convenient and least accessible for somebody in a wheelchair. The lift lobby is typically hidden at the back in a corner of the building after you navigate narrow corridors past tons of shops. You try going to the bathroom. We've been in situations where the handicapped bathroom is further than the regular bathroom. And when we finally get there, we find that it's locked because the mall operator wants to prevent unnecessary usage, extra cleaning, or abuse of use. You'd be surprised how many people steal a smoke break inside the handicapped toilets. This week during the PDA interviews and judging, someone shared a story that it's impossible to cross from Grand Hyatt to Lido or Wheelock Place if you're not mobile. Think about that. That huge junction of Orchard Road and Scotts Road. For most of us able-bodied people, we simply just go underground. We navigate that huge subterranean network that's Orchard MRT station, and then we pop up on one side or the other side of that junction. But for someone in a wheelchair, that's impossible. And this is also why, for 10 years, my mother and I never made that crossing. But it doesn't have to be this way. We can and we should aspire for a better society, a better place, a better human experience. I have since experienced some wonderfully accessible places where it's a delight for somebody in a wheelchair because the space was designed with them in mind from the start. And I wish my mother was still around to enjoy the extensive parks and green spaces that we have today, because I'm sure that would really have helped in her palliative journey. Her lived experience and my experience as her caregiver is just a small sample of the myriad of needs that the people have out there and that all of you as designers face every day. And I think it's precisely why today's panel discussion topics on designing for sustainable cities and designing for the human experience is so relevant and so pertinent. And it's not just about designing a city for the mobility challenged. It's about designing a place that we call home, as 𝗂𝗍𝗲 had shared. It's a place where we as residents enjoy a high quality of life. We have access to spaces, services, products, things that create joy, things that create a sense of belonging. I think we can do better, and that is my hope, and that is my belief. We are very privileged to have 6 of our jurors here today from many different countries, and I hope in their stories that they share with you, you will be inspired as well to create a better world for generations to come. I wish you an engaging session ahead, and I entrust our city and our home in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lim. As mentioned, we have a lot of design thought leaders in our space here today. Also, we have a packed auditorium. So before we begin our first panel, I want to invite everybody to take a group photo together. This is including all of our audience as well. So whenever our photographer is ready, everybody put on your best smiles. People at the back, you're going to be seen as well, yeah? So smile as wide as you can. We're just going to do a big group photograph right now. He had to ask, can I get a fun shot? Very cute. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. That was a great start to our Friday morning right here. And of course, with that, I saw like very cute, no? Some of your hearts, different kind of hearts all around. We will be beginning our session for today. The very first panel today, we will be discussing on the topic of designing for sustainable cities and high-density urban areas in Singapore and overseas, such as Hong Kong, Japan, and Thailand. So our first speaker would be Ms. Kotchakorn Voraakhom, founder and CEO of LANDPROCESS, Porous City Network in Thailand, as well as jury member of the design panel. A little bit more about Ms. Kotchakorn Voraakhom, otherwise known as Kotch. She is a Thai landscape architect who work on productive public spaces, tackling climate change in dense urban areas. She created the first critical green infrastructure for Bangkok at the Chulalongkorn Centenary Park, and her works also include the 𝗂𝘅𝗧𝗏 urban farm rooftop, the biggest urban farming rooftop in Asia, as well as the first bridge park across the river in any world capital, the 𝗘𝘅𝗽𝗶𝗄 Sky Park. Kotch received a UN Global Climate Action Award from the UNFCCC in 2020 and has been recognized in numerous lists, including the Time 100 Next list in 2019, the BBC 100 Women list in 2020, and the Bloomberg Green 30 for 2020 list. She has also been recognized by Time as one of 15 women fighting against climate change. So with that introduction, I would like to invite Kotch, please.
Sawadee-kha. Thank you, everyone. I'm probably not using the podium because otherwise you only see my eyes. So, sustainable city. First question for me is for who? Is it for you or for me or for UN? We actually have a very different experience and definition. And today I'm going to share mine. This is Bangkok, where you guys love to hang out and go for food and great experience for tourists, but it's such a worst place for people to live there, not to just travel there. So this is how flat we are, and this is an urban setting with a lot of concrete architecture. So when we think about landscape, we only think about, okay, you work in the planter, or you do some leftover space from whatever the development. But I just want you to understand that land is actually underground, that the whole city, the architecture is actually placed on. And the land is not, even we are flat, but the real land is not flat. It actually has its own dynamics. It's 3 dimensions beneath it. This is who we were as Venice of the East, or maybe Bangkok of the West. Yes. And this is my experience doing the flooding, and this is my favorite toy from my dad who created that for me. But this is the same experience in 2011 with the same word, flooding. So you can see that this is Bangkok. We are just right in the whole watershed. The whole water is gonna have to drain there. But through 2011, you can see how much water we have and how we keep Bangkok from getting wet. You can see that that part is not blue. So we flood other people who's Thai as well. And this yes, they are Thai. And this is how we have to confront with unexpected rain. Like it doesn't fall into like the dams that we built, but it's fall into like the urban setting. And this is the sea level rise. Crazy, we have no boundary. And you can see that Bangkok start to have our own beach, like Phuket, because it's coming closer and closer. So this is where you want to touch Bangkok boundary. You have to go into the boat and actually travel there. And this is how fast we go, and 15 minutes of rainfall. This is how life is, and you have fun having friends, and don't worry about us. We're very resilient. This is how we adapt. It's not a problem with the flooding, but the problem is about urban infrastructure that doesn't allow us to adapt. So right now, this is like right now, it's a copying, burning seasons. And you can see that this is not only from us, it's from Cambodia. Like, they burn and the wind flow through us and the Myanmar part. So it's just a transboundary impact that we're living in. And PM2.5, and this is the impact of the triple impact of climate change to Bangkok nowadays. So 10 years later, it's gonna be worse and worse. So I think we are at the point of adapt or die. So in 2012, I won a competition and to build the first park in 30 years. Some of you haven't been born yet, 30 years. Or all of you have been born in 30 years. It's just trying to find a young face, but yeah. So this is like right in downtown Bangkok, and the land costs 1,000 million US. Crazy expensive land, and they want to build another shopping mall. But do we really need that? So we flat, I inclined the whole park to collect several drops of rain, and equipped with rainwater tank, green roof, retention pond that work as a one system. I know all this work, but just the way we implement it with such a limited land, this is, I think, how we can be adapt as Thai. Like in every corner of this park, you can see people use, because it's the first one, the land's so expensive, and we fought so hard to have this piece. The wetland, the incline, the whole park can actually help the drain, and also the flooding to double the size when yes. And the bike for people to really feel what's the water today by their exercise. So it was lovely with the change. So it's the park that's designed to flood. And people will know that we can live with flood again. And it's got so many awards, and people love it. Youngster people were just like, this is the first incline park. We can have a concert here. And yeah, the tree goes, and perfect. And Mr. Antonio Guterres, the #1 climate change of the world figure, came to give the support to the local designer, such an honor. And they even give this example to be part of the UNDP, the Urban Ecosystem-Based Solution. So okay, I'm gonna go fast, but this is how we are, even how rich you are or how many GDP you make. But during the COVID, we has been put down on the same floor. And I think in terms of the food securities and the poverty problem is actually happened. Even you have 7-Eleven all Bangkok, but it's actually, if you don't have money, how could you get food? And within the COVID pandemic, we are here together. So this is open during the pandemic. It's the biggest urban rooftop in Asia. So I'm actually fought hard with an architect. No, I'm just kidding. We work together. So we work at par to having this architecture create from the problem of the rooftop that normally people don't easily access, and how is all this wet space on top can be part of the food security system, and how all this thing can slow down the runoff, create food for the campus, using solar roof to pump up all this retention water and just drain down, and you get food. So I think it's kind of like all-in-one, everything at once kind of solution, and we need that. We don't need just just make recreation for people, but we need all that possibility because we don't have enough land and we want to exist here. Bangkok has to be in the map. So we have to really be more creative of the limitation that we have, but not asking for something that we couldn't afford. So this is young generation is slow down runoff 20 times and create your food. And of course, answer the much public space that we need. And it was fun. It's the first time that the landscape architect got the year best from the architects award. And I think we need to work more together. And landscape can be concepts of many things. We're not working in the planter, we're working on the land. So that's the depth of the work. Yes. I'm sorry, architects, but yes, I know. This is Venice of the East or Bangkok of the West. This is who we are. But this is who we are right now. It's only about this. Let me know the time now. When it's 5 minutes. So this is who we are as a city. And you can see how bad we treat our own body. Thinking about the landscape as your body. We put something dirty in our vein, the blood vein clot, and we cut it out. And how could you survive as a living being? The city is not us. It's actually have its own life. It have its 3D quality, the underground water, the rain. And this is how it hasn't been connected. And this is me working with many governors. This is a previous governor. We have to clean this in order to survive our city. So right now it's open last year. It's a lot of thinking, like how we're gonna reconnect the canal that we disconnected and reclaim the natural infrastructure. And we picked this is right on CBD, 𝗂𝘂𝘀𝗶𝗴, Chong area. Na. So you have to connect the canal that connects to the river, using the wastewater and pump it back to the canals and make it more livable for people. Because this is so smelly and it's the most dirtiest canal, but it's actually right downtown CBD Bangkok. You guys probably don't enjoy this part. You just go to massage and all these little things, but this is, I'm trying to make it nice for us as well. So this is, I'll just go quickly. And it's so important, but it's still ongoing. And with the new governor, we have to reconvince him to complete the whole project. So this is the Bangkok-China wall between canals and people. Because when people drunk and fell off, maybe the tourists get killed from just get drunk. And they say, okay, we need to build the China wall so people safe. But the problem of that is just like the life after this separation is actually create the worst living, and these homeless people love it, which is great. They are part of the city, but this is not the place, right? We're not designed for this. So this is normal section, but think about how we have to go through all this department to, oh, this is not mine, I couldn't touch. This is not mine, I couldn't touch. The policy thing is very different. How, this is the most photogenic picture. No. So this is, it's a lot, and it's not like, I envy you that you have government taking care of this thing. But for us, we have to make government who are in the cycle of like, and break them down like this. Oh my God. It's a lot of work. So there's a lot of like meetings and things that we have to go through, and eventually we can take off the Bangkok-China wall. That's kind of living, right? How to sustain city. I have 3 minutes? Oh my God, okay. Okay, I go quick and I stop when I have to stop. So yes, this is how we supposed to use canal as place of human being. And luckily that it's got an award from UN Habitat. So the proof to the city, to the mayor, to the governor, to whoever that this is worth it of international recognition with all this small action in a big city. This is a leftover structure, and you can see that 40 years ago we built this thing. Imagine that we're gonna be the first nation to have the SkyTrain cross over the river, even before Singapore. And then 40 years later, it's still not coming. It's gone somewhere else. So what can we do with this structure? So we create a pedestrian bridge. It's the first one. This is our team. This is how prom it is, and it's so narrow. It's 8 meters with 200. So we create this landmark park. So come back and visit this park. Don't come in at noon, right? It's so hot. So the sunset and sunrise will be the perfect place. So we reuse what our vision has been there for 40 years, and we become the first public park is connect the existing two parks. First one in any capital of the world, because we think it 40 years ago. Woohoo! Yes, but it's a possibility for people to live in happily. And I think that's why the design have to play the very important part. And yes, and I think, okay, 1 minute. I'm not only working for those who have budgets and real client, or many of this doesn't have real client. We have to fight for the fundings and things, but also this is the big thing in Thailand, the speed train that's gonna be around the city, around the nation. And they have to displace poor people or who doesn't have right to stay in a place or informal settlement or slum people and all these things. Then they have this 400 million baht budget, and they say, okay, flood, let's do dam. But we have to tell them what's happened if they receive this money. You're gonna flood other people's more. You wanna flood your neighbors, and you're gonna flood yourself, because this is what it's gonna look like. Many of them who doesn't pay us, but have the right impact to this decision and design need to know, and we again so hard that this is not the right solution. Why you have to spend? I just realized that Thailand is a very rich country, but just the money doesn't go in the right place. So, and this is Jakarta, and we just like, do we want to be like that? Time out, okay. This is, do we want to be like this? And this is in New Orleans, the US. And I just gave the lecture at Harvard University and say, I'm sorry, we don't want to be like you. And, and okay, let me come back to our Southeast Asian country. We are at risk, and no man is an island. And we are in this together. So if our home is at risk, what can we do? Singapore will not better off. It's just a city in the nature because we are neighbor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Coach. That was an amazing presentation. Clearly, Singaporeans all do the same things in Thailand. Hopefully on your next trip there, you'll be able to see the country in a different light. So our second speaker for today will be the co-founder and executive director of Design Trust Hong Kong. She's also a jury member of the design panel, Miss Marisa Yu. So Marisa Yu is the co-founder and executive director of the Design Trust initiative that supports creative and research content related to Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area. She has been instrumental in shaping the growth of the NGO since 2014 and has created and conceptualized the Design Trust Futures Studio program. Marisa is also an architect and founding partner of SQ, a multidisciplinary architecture and research design studio that actively integrates culture, community, art, and technology. Marisa's work and writings have been published in AD, Doma's China, MIT's Threshold, and Architectural Record, amongst others. She has also spoken at numerous global platforms, including TEDx at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, BODW, UNESCO Forum, and Harvard's Asia GSD conference. She has taught at London's Architectural Association, Parsons, University of Hong Kong, and the School of Architecture at CUHK. Marisa is also an AIA member, HKIA associate, served on the board of advisors for RTHK, and was formerly a board member of the Hong Kong Ambassadors of Design. So with all of those achievements, we're very glad to have her here today. Can I invite Marisa, please?
Coach, hard to follow your very amazing work. Okay, let's see. I know I have 15 minutes, but maybe just to hold our thought on the role of architecture, designers, and participation in our city. It's a collective willpower to make change. It's been I have to be honest, a very difficult last few years in our city. This is my first official trip outside of Hong Kong, but it's also the willpower and the commitment of collective communities coming together. And I think this is something to keep in mind, the backdrop of what sustainability is. It's not so much about just matrix, the greening, reaching KPIs, but also involving the community in that process. So what I'm going to just share today is a very dear project to our foundation, but also as a citizen, to question our role and our civic responsibility in the production of any culture and city. I have a very colorful rainbow D for Design Trust. Our branding actually used to be very deep blue, but in the last few years, just thinking about psychology of color, representation of color, really makes us think about the notion of aspiration and hope through a apolitical and non-political environment. How do we bring that together through design? The kind of case study project I'll probably put forward is, how do we involve our community? How do we test with pilot projects and still embrace failure along the way, but also along that change mindset of ourselves and beyond our own communities. So this is just some case studies to share, exploration and the notion of smallness to harness bigger change. So a little bit different, Kosh, amazing work, and I have been admiring a lot of the kind of big moves and gestures of urbanism, and sometimes when you look at the end product, you don't realize how much effort, how much empowering, how much discussions and stakeholder management it takes to make change. So I really hope this is something quite special to share. So in 2007, the nonprofit Hong Kong Ambassador Design was founded to really encourage and support and advance competency, but also question expertise. And there was a moment of time where in 2013, we were doing a lot of, from 2007 to 2013, a lot of really exciting big gestural projects. I would say very exciting public space transformation, but also what is the question of kind of deep, rigorous research. So this is how we founded the community platform to benefit a kind of a younger generation of really talented students, formerly when I was more involved in academia, but also this kind of rising urgency to question, how can I own a home? What is the question of ability to build research and transformation of one's career as a young architect or designer, but also have an engaging discussion on the global platform of where design can actually participate. So fast forward from 2014 all the way to now, our program, our nonprofit organization, has provided support to about 523 designer grantee mentee fellows. And in 2017, there was an epiphany where we realized the only way we can impact mindset is actually to produce more experimental pilot projects. So we came up with this kind of community think tank program called Design Trust Future Studios, where it's both mentorship, menteeship, looking at urgent topics, having a lot of fun, having a lot of activism, creative activism, but at the same time really use play or looking at identity, heritage, as a way to explore new forms of collaboration. It's been, a lot of moments where what can we think about in our own city as a way to build new forms of community building. And of course, Hong Kong is a very special place. It's highly dense. About 75% of the land is actually countryside and green. So everything's kind of condensed in that 28% of urban density. And how do we then connect the community to have a role? One of the biggest pilot projects, I really had a humbling opportunity to be involved in. I think this is the pivotal point for me in 2009. As a younger architect curator, to have the potential to be commissioned by the government, different parties, to curate and lead curate the 2009 Hong Kong Shenzhen Bi-City Biennale of Urbanism and Architecture in Hong Kong. I came up with this theme called 城市動員, 城市動員, which is city mobilization. How do you involve the community, especially when there are a lot of huge pieces of land that were empty or reclaimed? How do you build and re-green or rethink our city? This is the West Kowloon Cultural District, very dear project. We were given the opportunity for 3 months activation to think about participation, social sustainability. We wanted to activate the land with our community and participate with debates, dialogues. We built the first Paper 2 pavilion with 𝗘𝗅𝗽𝗶𝗴 in 2009 to host open discussions, very difficult questions about the future of the city. We involved elderly to come on board to really question their expertise too and their accessibility with these activations. We hosted 400 students to come build and participate, and also micro farms. And this is actually quite seminal, realizing how our city shapes our behavior and how our behavior is being shaped by our city. We produced this eco farm with the Federation of Youth Group, another non-profit organization. And when the children arrived in the site with their parents, they had never touched soil. They also, you can see the parents getting really fearful, spraying antibacterial. This is 2009, not knowing how to grow your own plants or understanding, basic human behavioral necessities. So this was a really interesting trigger point to think about. How do we create activation, intervention, tactics to communicate the urgency of a city through play and creativity? We had designers and architects come challenge, how could you bring about urban and nature together? So this was Casey Wong on the left. This is called Two Wongs Going Out to Sea, and we had to challenge how could we launch boats in the sea to encourage new debates on living and nature. And what was fascinating with this is we found a loophole of you can put anything in the harbor if it's under 3 horsepower. And this created this huge kind of media sensation of what is the role of architecture, policy, design to engage our community. So fast forward, the foundation's been very active in shaping a lot of communities and culture and research abilities. And we were one of the first nonprofits to really believe in the kind of cultural transformation. So not sustainability in terms of sustainability in the kind of green matrix, but really the social aspiration of our culture, of the community. So we've been doing a lot of fellowship research partnerships. We've been uncovering the beauty of archives, really funding research grantees and mentees to participate, not only just physically, but also through granting programs. So it's really been a long journey since then, and although there's academic rigor needed, there's a lot of really powerful narratives and stories of architects' archive drawings, really thinking about the role of building our culture. And as we build more and more, there are a lot of projects in modern architecture that's being destroyed or demolished. And how do we regain our role as a foundational architecture role to communicate the preciousness of the cityscape? So that's a quick background. And maybe just to think about Design Trust Future Studio. This is a very, very unique, special program looking at how we are continuously learning, continuously changing mindset through the voices of emerging young designer and talent, and to match them with experts, but then the experts and mentors also become mentees potentially, and also are given briefs where they can challenge and also participate in the city. So 2017, we started with small is meaningful, just as a testing point, and looking at what is the future of living. If we are living in smaller and smaller spaces, it used to be called micro apartments, now it's nano. What are we doing beyond our homes? So as a very simple question, we curated and brought together 4 teams looking at different issues, but the brief was, how do you create your own park? We had really amazing mentors come on board, international, local, and someone on the right who did the 2 Wongs Out to Sea also as a role model. How do you find those role models to transform young designers and architects? Stanley Wong on the left with the spectacles created all the posters for In the Mood for Love, 𝗘𝗂𝗀𝗶𝗴. He spends 30% of his life as a Buddhist philosopher, and 30% on his commercial world, and 30% giving back. So we didn't only want to find mentors in terms of designing ability, but also designing mindset and participation on how you as a human being can also transform careers. We also selected Gary Chang, who's our famous interior architect in Hong Kong, who's been living in the same 32 square meter apartment for the last 45 years. And he tests it as like an engagement of transformation. It could be a library, it could be a place for his students, it's a place for his bar, his CD collection, but it's transformed as a test on using the most minimal space for maximum impact. And along the way, this journey, we started to attract the policymakers, the government members, because of the interventions and activations of how do we create spaces for the city, because there are really not that many pocket parks and micro parks that are developed in a way for the community. And you know, we were looking at skip park construction, depot pieces as mobile parks, and what you realize is, you know, access to public space is a basic human right, and there are about 1,800 public parks in Hong Kong, ranging from as small as 44 square meters all the way to 2,000 or more. And they're very not designed in a way that gives human dignity and also social aspiration, play, risk-taking. So we did a lot of these really activistic intervention tactics, stitching together and questioning what is the smallest park bench you can hang off a railing. And this started to make us realize, or the community realize, we need to really think about our public realm, our public space. And if we don't, is the future going to be Uber delivery or future delivery of parks to your home? And you know, throughout time, what was amazing is just the process of piloting, access intervention. We then had this really amazing opportunity in 2018, right before all the extraordinary activities that we face as a city to the recent pandemic, a very open-minded discussion on what is play. So we developed the next version of Plays for the People, a Design Trust Future Studio, on what is the future of micro parks in Hong Kong, and how do we commit ourselves along this journey to change career paths for young designers' opportunity. How do you change the mindset of government parties, policymakers, and promote really exciting discourse and exchanges within government, outside of government, and a very open collaborative process. So I'm humbly honored. It's not been an easy process because it's also utilizing creative bureaucracy models. It's also looking at micro park networks that potentially could be designed by the people and for the people. And that was one of our biggest ambitions, was not to just look at big international context, but with a city as a laboratory. And over time, we had a very honest discussion with different members of the community, and we were allowed to shortlist some sites and selected 4 amazing sites within the fabric of Hong Kong, 4 different types of typologies, ranging from really, really different districts in a very underprivileged communities, and activate them in new ways. So each park, whether it's a sitting out area, it's within a courtyard space surrounded by subdivided flats, or it's spaces within infill sites or corner sites that are underutilized, we were able to retransform and look at this as a community. And I'm just saying it's not so much about the process itself of designing the end game, it was designing relationships. So one of my interests is to build community platforms that bring experts, you know, even 𝗘𝗫𝗃𝗃 came on as an advisory member for workshops. We had Liza come on board from sharing on the High Line. We will also be able to bring a lot of young designers and architects in different multidisciplinary teams. So a graphic designer working with a social designer, with an architect, and an architect working with a industrial product graphic designer along the way, and curate those experiences actively in a very open crit format. So perhaps as an architecture training, that allowed us to understand the power of education and the role of architecture and the multidisciplinary nature, and stakeholder management allowed us to really build new types of innovation. So it's been a really fascinating journey. I know I don't have too much time, but bringing the community along from the beginning as an active live studio, testing new types of playgrounds, inclusive playgrounds. Honestly, there's not that many parks in Hong Kong that actually look at it from a universal access standpoint. We also were able to test a lot of prototypes, and in the site itself, use the physical prototypes as a way to engage the community directly to give us feedback. We also had amazing developers come on board to offer free venues for site engagement. There was a lot of concern groups, a lot of fighting, a lot of debating. But what I realized is the power of a model, the power of drawings to visualize and communicate is really an extraordinary method and opportunity for us to work together to shape the city. So 𝗂𝗀𝗃𝗃, this young designer, graduated from one of the universities, I think it was 2015, very talented, was already, we could see she had a really special, unique talent on engagement, so we brought her in. And what was amazing through this process is she worked with a lot of communities that were surrounded above and living in very tight subdivided flats. And when we did open the park in 2021, this 8-year-old girl who participated in the workshop was saying, and really proud to see her little models produced into reality with the community. And this is the mindset we're thinking of touching. Like, how does architecture really touch the grassroots community, but at the same time, change government policy? And we were very pleased with this process to enable the government parties to commit to 170 play spaces to be engaging the community in the next 5 years. These shots are from a very difficult time that we all faced during the pandemic. And also pre-pandemic, a lot of new ways of activation and hybrid designing with the community, and with the kind of, before site visit, the engagement of community, the renderings to the reality, about 150 meetings in the last 2 years, 3 years to produce. But the breakthrough is as simple as using graphics to enliven the community, to create very informal play spaces merry-go-rounds that were often seen as a way to encourage play and risk-taking for young children. The elderly in one side of the park, multi-generational safety, you know, looking at their community within itself, and also able to re-energize underserved communities and give them dignified places. So the last few slides, just to share, it's these multidisciplinary teams. My role is not so much an architect or a curator, but a facilitator in the process. We can't do what we do without many layers of expertise coming together. And this is sort of a takeaway in impact. If a project is seen successful, it really is because of the rigor of that process in itself. And the outcome, we're still learning. There's a lot of materials, whether they could be reconstituted with strongest sense of grading without deterioration, or is there other ways of improving playground spaces that give uniqueness to that community? There's many, many questions we are still working on. But what's aspirational and hopeful and optimistic is how architecture, urbanism, graphics, the willpower of multidisciplinary teams, the understanding of our, you know, serious, rigorous observation on how we live or utilize in a city, and taking action to give dignified seating and really respect the community as along the way and add more greenery. This pink park was very controversial. Because it was in a former red light district, and so there was a lot of pushback about just color in itself, engendering a different way of looking. But what was amazing with this particular team, after bringing them to New York's Bryant Park, which was in the 80s, crime infested, had you know, really difficult kind of situation of drug abuse, very similar. This area had the similar kind of notations, but it was a public-private partnership model, and using color to re-energize and study psychology. We were looking at studies of how prison cells, if you paint them pink, it decriminalizes activity, but pink also celebrates love and passion, and it was also Squid Game season, so this park became this really odd space of bringing layers of Halloween costumes. We had old aunties coming from different districts to see because pink became this fashionistas' haven. So we can read into our spaces, but it also should be as open and diverse to build sort of humanizing spaces. So I'll end here. It's been massively challenging. I also am very lucky to have a lot of different types of communities to come test with us, play chess. There's a lot of press media. We have been very lucky to communicate. It was on CNN very recently. With Hong Kong's reputation right now, it was actually a really pivotal moment last September when we opened more parks for the community. To celebrate optimism and hope during such really extraordinary times we face, but also see the hopefulness of how design, prototyping, looking at under flyover spaces as a global discussion on how lighting can transform safety and access to really beautiful, dignified areas. And also one of our biggest challenge now is to restore and imprint our heritage. So this site is really powerful. I welcome you to come visit. We've just soft launched this, but we wanted to celebrate from 1840s all the way to 1984. This particular area had a lot of cultural invigoration. Films were made. A lot of bamboo steamers, like old seafood craft was born in this area. There's a lot of really amazing stories about regeneration and revitalization through times from the British colony all the way to how Hong Kong is a special administrative region. So there's a lot of things to talk about how public space knits dialogue, narrative, history, community participation, and I'm really excited. Our next park is hopefully going to be completed by April. And this one will be very special because it's actually created with local craftsmen. And this is quite novel because all the parks and procurement process in Hong Kong is, the specifications are quite strict. But we were able to really utilize the testing and have Sifus who are making these beautiful old chopping boards to create the signage. There's an amazing 65 or 80 long year history of these copper makers that are actually involved in making the park elements together. So just to conclude, I know my time's up, but just to thank you so much. I've learned a lot in the last week. We all have similar values to make change and reclaim the role of architecture design that can make change. But it's also this notion of generosity of spirit and how we collectively pull our resources and to kind of better our region and aspiration. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Marisa, for sharing about your projects in Hong Kong. I especially love how the simple use or the change of a color can evoke so much change. So finally, we do have architect Chan Soo Khian, founding principal and design director of SCDA Architects Singapore, as well as jury chair of the architecture panel. Architect Chan is a founding principal and design director of SCDA, a design studio seamlessly integrating architecture, interior design, landscape architecture, as well as product design to create holistic spatial experiences. So SCDA has offices in Singapore, Shanghai, and New York, and the firm has designed over 70 locations across Asia, Africa, Europe, Oceania, and North America. Architect Chan was the inaugural recipient of the President's Design Award and the recipient of 3 American Institute of Architects International and the AIA New York Awards for Architecture, as well as 3 Royal Institute of British Architects International prizes, and 9 Chicago Athenaeum Awards. The works of SCDA have been published extensively and presented at the Venice Biennale. Chan has been featured at the Salone del Mobile for product design for established Italian brands Poliform and Christina. So right now, I'd like to introduce and invite Architect Chan, please.
Good morning. 8 years ago, I was here also presenting on the forum. And the topics that we talk about has shifted so much. So for this particular forum, I thought about what I could contribute. And one of the things that I thought I could share was some of the things that actually happened to me on a personal level, right? The power of climate change. As architects, sometimes we work in silos and we may be a bit detached from what's happening. But this is one of the most placid, beautiful sites in Wyoming. In 2020, in the middle of the lockdown, all of us dreamed of an escape. So I was looking for a site to build a hotel for myself in the Catskills, and I chanced on this. And I bought it sight unseen, right? And it was only after a year later, at my first opportunity, I was there surveying the site. It did not disappoint. It was calm, it was beautiful. And of course, as an architect, my first instinct is what do I want to build there, and how do I use this opportunity to test out all the ideas I have to build sustainably, to be off-grid, to use the local stone to crush, to engage the community. The list went on and on and on. But our ideas and our plans do not always go as planned, right? So the design that you see on the left tried to fit in, and we engaged the planners, and they were happy that we're there, and we checked all the boxes. There was a bridge that's already there. And I spoke to our jury chair in your panel on how I should strengthen it. I went to strengthen it. I did the water test to do everything that I need to do to be as polite a building as possible. And we used SimScale to study wind, which I can imagine winds of 150 40 miles an hour at the peak. And then solar as well, to really understand the impact each room and where to put the solar panels to actually maximize. Okay. So this is all good. This is all good. But nature has its own plans, right? First of all, this is what happened, right? And we worked with the science, we worked with what we really want to do. But nature has its own plans. So this was the design that I came up with. The plan was to engage a community, to have a luxury hotel, and I feel like the word luxury need not be a bad word for architects, because even to engage with climate change, you need private finance, you need family offices, you need the levers of power and cooperation, okay? It was a way to really look at nature and be a polite neighbor, okay? But plans changed. A week before the community hearing, an investigative reporter Googled and found out about this job, found out that we had another hotel in Bali that was also luxury. And unfortunately, at that time, Kanye West bought a 600 hectare site close to this. That's bad. That's really bad, right? So the result of it was a community hearing and thumbs down. Plus, I really did not feel welcome. In Bali, I felt welcome. You know, in Wyoming, you can expose your weapons. So in the town hearing, it was quite a cultural experience. If you look at the little slide on the lower right, you can see the room filled with people not from here. But I understand, because there were wildlife conservation groups. Golden Eagle was 2 miles away, so I had to move my building. 2 miles away, I moved my building, right? And then we had found artifacts from Native American. So we got a scaled-down permit to build 3 ranch houses. And really, I just wanted to do something that was low impact, so I created my own brief of an artist in residence studio with a gallery and then promote native artists. I just want to make something, an experiment, to be totally off-grid. And so the form was generated by some of the wind parents. Okay, and it was at a time where I really wanted my building to react climatically to real science, and not just rely on reusing material or cross-ventilation and planting more trees on the facade. This is not what I wanted to do. But then the plan changed again. In June 13, we had the 1 in 500-year flood in the Yellowstones, and this was the ferocity of the river. Look, I saw the slides, I saw the video at CNN and Al Jazeera on Pakistan, 1/3 of the country was flooded. I saw the climate in Beijing, in China, and in Europe above 40 degrees. But then the bridge was no more. I had no bridge, I had no site. And I was actually arguing to be closer to the floodplain, because in the last 100 years, there's never been a real flood. And the river was so calm. But this is a personal revelation, okay? But this is not new. 3 weeks ago, I was in Siem Reap, and I wanted to take a trip down the river. The Mekong Delta always floods, and the Tonlin Sap Lake. People are adapting. These people lived with tidal shifts of 30 feet, water 30 feet, but then they build lightly, and they accept the condition. So it really shows resiliency, adaptability. And then I heard from my guide the government's going to build lake walls. You know, I was concerned because it's melt adaptability. You know, you build the walls, it could really impact other areas. But this is where I think, as professionals, as architects, we need to cross-adapt and talk to people in other disciplines as well. Okay. I saw the community, I saw a market, I saw kids going to school, I saw a funeral, all within this low-impact, unplanned area. They've existed for a long time, right? But they are resilient. They're very resilient, and they live with this every year, okay? And they try to mitigate. So these are all the things that are happening, real crisis. But I think as architects, we're a bit detached. We're still looking at our microsites and trying to think, oh, what can we do to reduce our impact on our 1 hectare site? Okay. So this is where I go back to Wyoming, and I realized that, oh, maybe I shouldn't put anything. But I was determined to put something, you know. I just keep scaling down. It's getting smaller and smaller. So this one, okay, light footprint. I don't even need a permit. If I would, and yeah, so really, I created something called Tender, which is actually outside the URA. If you have time, have a look. But in URA, we are quite shaded, so sometimes air conditioning doesn't come on. There's no music, there's no sound, because all my videos have sound. Can we redo it? Start again. But it's interesting how 8 years between PDAs. At that time, the speakers were Richard Rogers. It was Richard Rogers, Kerry Hill, and all the star architects. But today, I'm glad that we have other people from other disciplines speaking. But this was quite recent, the last 3-4 years. Well, continue talking, right? Well, technology kind of like throw off the rhythm. Okay, what do architects do? We work in silos, including me. I will talk forward a little bit. I try these days consciously to talk to non-architects about climate, you know, chief sustainability officers of corporations, people who are more activists, just because I feel like what we know and what we're doing has such little impact. We need to plug in. What else do I say? Okay. But architects are really concerned. We have a heart. But we huddle together and we talk within our disciplines. There was a statistic. Very few architects are invited or attend climate conferences. Maybe less than like 0.1%. But architects do try and mitigate, but there's another way. I think sometimes we can help outside of our own profession.
Yes, you can use this. You can press on the back.
All right. So after the intermission, what I was saying was that I tried to scale down, and the experiment took a little while. I built a prototype first in Bali, and now one in Singapore. So this was an opportunity to rethink the hospitality industry, because we also work with the luxury brands. If there could be another brand that we can rethink to experiences and nature. Okay, so this is us. We are serious and we convene and we talk. I've been in some of these. And we talk about the problems, but we try to solve it on our own with architectural means. And on our own, we tend to have bolder, bigger ideas, and we tend to pick up on things like reusing materials and so on and so forth, which I think the discussion has to go beyond that, right? But there are already many organizations that are tapped in and doing the same thing. And they include all the disciplines, and there are architects among them too. This is a real statistic. Some say 21, some say a bit more, but participation, very little, right? How can we be taken seriously if we're not plugged into a larger dialogue that's going on, okay? And globally, while climate change is a global problem, there's also local things we can do. UN programs have been set up, right? They set agendas. Even if we can't go, we can still be in touch. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is an important one because you need to vet what is the latest science, what is real and what's not real. And even as architects, there are architecture professions have organized about commitment to 1.5 degrees by 2030, the Paris Accord. So a lot of firms have pledged to do that. At least in terms of intention, we are committed. And these goals have been adopted widely, okay? But beyond that, on a local level, what can we do? We can do small things. 1 million trees is one of them. Our company has pledged 1,000 trees, which is actually $300,000, and we are not there yet. We are only barely 30,000, but we are getting there. We're getting our staff to include our vendors and contractors to pledge. We hope to do that within a year. And these are adopted just to kind of imbue consciousness into our own practice. Okay? And we are the global design partner with 𝗂𝗃𝗃 for Oceans and Marine Life Conservation in New York for several years already. But it's not just environment. Is social and cultural, as some of our speakers have spoken about. And I would like to just illustrate one project where I think that has driven the design. This project is in Bali. Bali itself is magical and allows for you to do these things, okay? In 2010, we were certified 𝗘𝘂𝗀𝗃, and that was a long time before the climate dialogue is as prevalent as today. And in 21, we had the Change Maker Award and the Sustainability Leader finalists for 𝗘𝗀𝗀𝗃. But this was what it was when I acquired the site in 26, paddy fields. As we know, paddy fields are not really good. It deforested and methane emissions, and it's all cut down, right? So this is what it was. And this is what it is, because as part of the program with the hotel there, the reforesting, the establishment of nursery for local fauna, and also using the local fauna to mitigate against erosion. This is part of the program that was started a long time ago. So you can see the sites of the erosion is some wood and some 𝗖𝗄𝗃𝗃𝗃 plants. Further up the river, there was big erosion, and we built a small stretch of seawall, and we realized that it just pushes the problem somewhere else, right? And even my personal experience in Penang, I had an apartment overlooking the ocean in Gunny Drive. There was a project reclaiming just up, and all of a sudden, the beach was gone. It became, the tide receded, okay? So this is a site plan of how it was. To start, Bali is full of religious ceremony. They're very integrated daily into the spirituality. So when we started, I was advised that in order for this hotel to succeed, you need to build temples, and there were 11. And we engaged the priest of the village to determine where the temple should be, big and small. So this is where he walked and just pointed. And then there was also irrigation, because there was a working paddy field inside. We had to speak to irrigation head. There was a lot of built-in cultural rules that we respected, including access to temples through the hotel. And I think all that initially was looked at as constraints. But in the end, I think working with the constraints actually help ground the hotel in its placemaking. And then we live in harmony with the surrounding community. There's no way I was going to be able to live peacefully in Wyoming, so we are not doing anything. We're just putting a few tenders, you know. There's no point being there when you're not welcome, you know. So Daily Blessings, the hotel, we've actually engaged full-time on our staff, 2 priests to bless the staff and to bless the temples. But this is what architects do and say. We use local materials. We did that also. This is within 4 kilometers from the site as batu paras. We use it extensively. The local crafts of terracotta, we use it extensively as well. And then we try to source the main staple from the agricultural community around the hotel. And then for the spices, as part of the guest experience, we have them instead of importing them. We rainwater harvest, and we bottle our own water. There's no plastics. And 85% of our staff are from the village, which means you don't need to commute. They come by motorcycles, walk or cycle, and a lot of them have been there since the very beginning. Grey water recycling. This is an inspector from 𝗘𝘂𝗀𝗶𝗴𝗶 to certify for us. So I believe that we cannot just claim and greenwash. We have to be science-based, and we have to hold up to what we claim. 15% of the total development only is climate control. So while I do these things, I believe that we can still uphold design quality, which is what our conversations was about. It has to be both. We have to be responsible and still uphold design, right? This is the bar. And even in the spa, it's naturally ventilated. You see rain coming down, and it's very, very connected, except for the spa rooms. They're open. The restaurant's open. It's designed with a low-hanging rain canopy and natural ventilation through the slots at the top. So luxury need not be a villain. Luxury need not be bad. We may not necessarily discount. We judged an entry which I argued, and I shortlisted it because it had a luxury brand. It was a good project by 𝗘𝘅𝗽𝗏, but because the brand was luxurious, Ritz-Carlton, I think most of our jurors discounted it. But I allowed them to come and present, to at least give them a chance to see what they're trying to do. Luxury is here to stay. Let's not kid ourselves. We need to engage them, okay? No doubt our clientele is also quite high level, but some of these people do appreciate, and they only visit hotels who are more sustainable. It's gotten to a level where they too want to be a part of it. Okay? Community engagement is big. I was told we shouldn't handle the turtles. So as architects, we build, and we still build a lot, you know, but in parallel, I think we can try to do parallel initiatives to try and kind of offset part of what we do. And we need to expand what we discuss and we talk about. We need to engage more people. And we need to break away from what architects always do, which is to be siloed and to also exist at a very high level when actually humanitarian crisis is happening at such amazing rate. We need to be a part of that, even though it's not architecturally involved. We need to be active. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Architect Chan, for sharing. I'd actually like to invite you back over to the front and take a seat over here instead. Because right now we're going to be moving on to the question and answer segment. So hopefully everybody has found this morning's sharing very insightful. I'll also like to invite the rest of our panel members to kindly join Architect Chan in front. So for our speakers. And of course, moderating this session would be Dr. Hossein Rezai, Global Design Director of Ramboll and Founding Director of Web Structures Singapore. He's also the jury chair of the design panel. A little bit more about Dr. Rezai. He is an engineer, a design visionary, and an educator. So one of the initiators of the concept of fusion engineering, he is the first and only engineer to receive the coveted PDA Designer of the Year. He's very passionate about the process of advanced computational design and a holistic approach to architecture, structure, and environment. Hossein's high-profile contributions to industry discourse include his involvement in the master jury for the Aga Khan Award for Architecture and his service as a jury member for the PDA ever since 2017. So to our audience, again, please take this opportunity to ask any questions you might have during this Q&A segment. This is one of the only chances you have. You may scan the QR code on the screen right now to actually submit your questions. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to invite Dr. Hossein Rezai to kickstart the panel discussion. So speakers, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that presentation. And welcome, everybody. Good morning. And I was just told that I look more handsome in person than my photograph. So starting with a beautiful compliment. So I'll be asking you the most easiest of the questions because of that compliment. But I came here prepared. I had all my questions typed, and then I did all these handwritings while I was sitting there because I realized all the questions were beautifully answered by the prolific speakers whom we had. So I need your help, please, to get engaged and involved through this thing so that I had some questions to raise. In the way of introduction, we had this beautiful and moving introduction by Lee-Bei and Dawn, followed with these three highly informative and insightful presentations by our speakers. What I picked up, the word that I've written here, the part that I can read, is the theme of activism came through. Even though excuse me, even though our speakers come from different backgrounds, at one end of the spectrum, luxury that Sue spoke about, the education and social community engagement, and the beautiful landscape architecture that we saw from Koch. But the theme that for me bound the three presentation together was activism, and I just wanted to maybe start with the theme, the main theme of the day, which is creating a better world through design. That's like huge theme. Just a general question: how do you see design creating a better world the way that you're doing through your respective work? And maybe while you're talking about that, while we're making a better world, let's accept that it is a better world, but is it is it good enough? What we are doing, is it good enough to achieve the sustainability goals, the 1.5 degrees, and the things that you all talked about? Maybe we start with Koch. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yes, I think when we talk about adaptability, I feel that we have to be the one who adapt. And I think from many terminology, we still adapt nature to us, right? Like we say, yeah, adaptability, mitigation, but everything has a human-centric design. I think we still doing the same thing, just create more terminology. Nature-based solution, eco-based solution, adaptability, for adaptability. But I just feel that we're still keeping doing the same thing. And I'm criticized on my work as well, that at some point we have to serve human needs. But in that sense, how can we not adapt nature, but adapt ourselves? Learn to grow food, learn to teach the younger generation, and adapt from what we have. And I guess the less human-centric will be the answer that we are not center of the universe. But do we really put that? If, of course, and some country will be hit harder and some wouldn't be hit anything from the climate change. Maybe they get warmer. Maybe they like it better. But I just feel that from us, we are an agriculture country. And majority of the people who we're supposed to serve is actually under the standard of the basic quality. Don't even mention about the green space public per capita. We like really high up that we are lacking in Bangkok. So I just feel that how can the design change its narrative that it's not serving only one part of the people, and mostly we are trained to serve like a top high, what we mentioned, luxuries or those who can pay us, but how can we serve those our design would impact more than just really focus on those who pay us, but the design have to be broader sense. Sure. Yes.
Thank you. Marisa, you specifically mentioned creative activism in the more, and the contrast in the context within which you work compared to Koch, you know, in a sort of highly urbanized environment in Hong Kong, and the work that you showed. Would you like to talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, activism sounds very radical, and also seems to be seen as, you know, a negative light. So maybe we would say creative collaboration. Maybe it sounds a little bit more diplomatic in this context. I think to answer your question, yes, I think sustainability, building a better city, in one sense, we need to know more about our own values. And I think with the last few years, what we've all faced collectively or in our own kind of city and culture, we actually realize there's much more to do. And especially with the projects, the micro-park projects, although we did it, you know, it's been a long journey for the last decade to build up to that. You realize more and more the importance of the public realm for mental health, for well-being. There's this kind of stigma of, you know, city and greening, but when it comes to like human behavior and psychology, that's the most important. There's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of ways people don't and can't express themselves, but you realize, you know, there's a lot of issues with, say, one of the communities above that was sharing, you know, there's access to technology that was not spoken of, you know, children that had to be on Zoom, but had no access to joining with the access of technology to learn. Or you have parks that were completely closed off, and without that access to play, run around, you realize that kind of social human value was just being depreciated or underappreciated. So I think what's been fascinating is this kind of notion of keeping it open-minded enough with the precision of what can we do with just a very innocent question, and riding on that openness to build dialogue and activate cities and interventions in a way that kind of bring your own perspective into it. I think that's a model that we're continuously testing. And whether it's like, yes, we need to build allocations of community ownership of public parks so people take care of them, or could you actually bring sustainable, grid, off-grid formats. It's complex, but if we don't test them by doing, improving, then you can't get the buy-in. So I think I come from it from more of that angle. But in terms of good design, or what is good design, I think it's just basically really looking at more on the human condition, and it's complex. Everyone has their own needs, from developers who want to hit KPIs or bring the largest economic value. But one development is great, but what does it do to gentrification or the sustainability of an environment of culture and businesses? So it's very complex, and I think it's good to sometimes just have very precise questions and singular action to test it, and then it becomes more regional. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sue, you were encouraging us to get engaged with COP, with international movements on climate change, etc., etc.
Yes.
Would you like to expand
No,
on that?
I just think that
think?
we have such skills, design thinking, systems thinking, and we all want to do good, but we are not sure. None of us have the opportunity to be plugged in, like, for example, projects you have, Koch. And I think if we look beyond architecture, there are people who want to fund. There's philanthropy trust. There's even banks with funds. They have millions of dollars that we don't have. And they're also looking for people like us. So my simple message was not to just write off, because we need to coexist with private capital. And I think there's a convergence. Today, philanthropic and well-heeled families want to do good, even more so, but they don't have a forum. And understand that it's beyond what we can do in the building. It's a global crisis. It's unequal. Singapore will be fine. We have a, I think, budget of 150 billion to build seawalls, but not all countries can do that. So it's a kind of activism, but a way of actually being able to use our skills to fulfill ourselves. Because I realized that even for a small project like Tender, I was able to talk to many companies. So we need that segue, and also understanding that we don't have as much power as we think, right? We need legislation, the levers of power. We need concerted efforts globally, and on our own we can't.
True. Thank you.
I have a question. Is Singapore going to build a seawall and then be better off from the Southeast Asia?
I don't know the real plan, but we have a budget to mitigate.
What about Thailand? No, we don't have budget for that.
𝗘𝗅𝗽𝗶𝗴.
No, I just want to add on, like, for the COP, my experience, and I see your statistic, like, architect was 43, and I went to COP 26, and it was the first, I was the first landscape, and the only one, not that I'm the only one, but there's only one of us who talk about nature-based solution in the whole conference. And people keep asking for solution, and architects have, like designers have, but it's very few of us. And from 43, how many from developed world? Whereas Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Hong Kong was in there? None of us there. So the world making decision without us, yes.
I want to add to that as well. On a governmental level, for example, the Singapore delegation, they tend to be in green finance or something else. They also have not included us. So this is one thing that governments can do also to expand the idea that architects can be part of the solution, right? Absolutely,
architects and designers. Yeah. One of the themes of this week's deliberations for PDA award was, of course, the key word was design. I think that's the most used one. The second most used one I would think was something like transdisciplinary. Something that we saw that actually the profession, the general industry and the built environment practitioners are moving towards being transdisciplines, that there's a mixture of people who are architects, designers, engineers, and their landscape designers, etc. And you also mentioned that it is the work that you presented, for instance, the large and beautiful rooftop park, is that, as you were intimating with us, is questioning, is that landscape, is that hydrology, is that architecture, is it public space? And that is sort of the call for more moving towards outside our silos of one discipline as another, right?
Yeah, I think Marisa would have a better, good answer for that as one. And I just feel that in reality, we fought so hard. And in reality, maybe architects might not be very happy because they don't have facade, right? Which is everything. And all the facade is being turned. But when we work at par, when we've been giving enough space or equally space, I think that's the key. And that doesn't come just like, yeah, happily and ever, like we laugh and we holding hand each other, ASEAN Summit or something. No, but it's actually a lot of negotiations, budget-wise, trying to have landscape architecture space in architecture and in engineer is very tough. And I was surprised to the process that we've been talking through this week. It's not very easy here in Singapore as well, because the craftsmanship, there's a lot of, I'm sorry, but there's a lot of presence of architects. And I think we haven't been, and that's just like one of architecture around my nation that we work at par. What about the other thousands architects that haven't included enough multidiscipline? And I think we kind of fight among the boundary of urban design architects. But overall, at the COP, the world, we perceive as a weak profession, right? They don't have us.
As a weak profession.
Weak, yeah, like, because otherwise we should have a seat there, right? So I just feel that it's not about who we are, architect, landscape, or urban design, or design thinker, or thinking, but I just feel that we have to hold each other strong enough to really go have a presence and fight for a bigger statement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no. I think from my sort of attitude is there's a respect for everyone's expertise, journey, and knowledge, education, and the idea is to connect the best of everyone's ability. And one thing I love to talk about, I keep talking about this 𝗂𝗶𝗶𝗴 playground. It's a real case study, a pilot of ownership with a collective community. So without the industrial designers' access to detail, or without the landscape urbanism elderly expert who's looking at biophilia and its presentation, without the government architect knowing all the building codes and regulations, and I was sitting in these huge workshops with the chief of fire department to figure out the EVA access, so we could actually break down barriers. There's this kind of interesting model of not just transdisciplinary, but other disciplines we neglect. So where's the psychologist? Where's the non-profit organizer who actually understands the community? Or where is the amazing playground expert who understands if you build an extra meter, the children will think of that heightened attitude as taking risk, and therefore builds understanding of physical cognitive ability, right? So there's a lot of studies, a lot of kind of statistics and knowledge that needs to be imparted for us to know how to design better. So I use that example of the elderly man sitting on the ground of one of the parks. He actually likes to lean, but we couldn't design because of the code regulation certain kind of armchairs there wasn't enough seating, so we had to fight to increase these beautiful like extended terrazzo benches, so these individual elderly women or men could sit, could lie, could be comfortable without strict kind of postures to give them the ability to relax. So it sometimes just comes down to ergonomics, appreciation of the human body, the psychology. And I think, from a architecture design standpoint, it's kind of this intellectual curiosity that how do we build systems where you just begin to learn, continuously learn. It's not so much about knowledge building, it's knowledge transfer. And I use the example of the engineering, the lighting one. We couldn't achieve without asking nonprofit organizations and leaders of 𝗘𝘅𝗽𝗶𝗄, to give us like their own research data, to then present that back to architects or engineers who might not have that information to empower them. So sometimes you need that kind of transference of sharing and openness, and the willingness to try new things.
Great. Yeah. I love that idea of inclusivity, including psychologists, historians, etc., as part of the design team, as it were, because they're also designers. So we're just warming up, but I'm told.
We have 5 more minutes?
Yeah. I'm told we have only three minutes left. Yeah, the questions are in here.
The audience?
Yes, I'm using some of the questions I'm raising. I'm sort of combining the question. There are 1 or 2 specific questions, like Sue, to you about the waste plastic collected at 𝗘𝗂𝗀𝗶𝗴. Like, what happens with the plastic that is collected? The plastic rice for plastic. Right. Scheme that you have.
Recycling plastic is not exactly that big an impact. It's an issue. But for us, we see it as a process of education, because for the villagers, talking to them is not as effective as doing. The impact for us is that our beaches are clean, because it's all upstream use of plastics. But dealing with the plastic is our biggest issue. Not all the plastics are clean, and at the end of the day, it's not that sustainable. We use an outside contractor for recycling because we have no way of really doing it, right?
Okay, thank you. One question directly addressed to Marisa about the success of these pocket parks that you have, that will obviously, hopefully, increase footfall. And the question is, will the pocket parks create more footfall of the already crowded urban areas and create nuisance to the residents? How do you control or balance that?
Well, apparently the Hong Kong population has moved to Singapore.
Yeah.
So
that has helped.
As a reaction, things have changed. I mean, although we started it's a long process. It's been 4 to 5 years with many complexities in the last few years. But what's really interesting is now it's not so much the success of the think tank or the project or the community. Now it's really building, opening, and engaging the neighborhood to have ownership. and have them appreciate this as part of their community. So there's many things I was just explaining. One of the newest parks that we opened, there's a hardware store owner who works really hard, building materials. People go there. He started using the linear nature of the edge of the park curb as a cutting tool, and he marked 5 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet to make it efficient for his own store use. Instead of using the measuring tape, he's like drilling. So we're observing, we're using now this kind of post-occupancy study to reflect on what have we done wrong, or are we leveling the chess tables correctly? Is the lighting, it was so perfect because we had originally involved the community. They didn't want light pollution. So what we engineered was the lighting would go downward to avoid the residents' problems. So although we're mindful, we can't control human behavior, whether it's good or bad. It's this really nice way of saying, not the manicured parks maybe is the best, but if there are these edges and moments where you feel you could participate and use it to your own benefit, that's a win-win for all. But the success is only if, people now are starting to say, oh, can we imitate, can we mimic this? So I'm not saying that the pink park should be everywhere. It was coming out of a process of a context. But now it's more of a, next step is a more district-led regional level. We've tested this small park, but how could it really emanate and disseminate knowledge so that other people can utilize the public participation process to involve different communities to design their parks?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And one last question, which is addressed to Kosh. About your parks, the parks are amazing. But they're still at localized locations. Do you have any vision or a grander plan for the entire city? I presume this might be alluding to potential, park connectors of the type that we have in Singapore, and the overall vision for the city, like in Bangkok in this case.
I would like to have park connectors, but we don't have enough park yet, so to connect to begin with. And I just feel that that's a good question, but I think it's not about me or designer to be naive that we can erase people and then put more parks, and that's very difficult to displace people. And I just feel that for us using design to be positive, find this possibility, what we have to adapt. And I just feel that eventually we're gonna sink. But we're gonna live there. So how would you be more creative with that things? And it doesn't mean that Bangkok's gonna be moved to somewhere, because people's gonna stay there. And I just feel that the most important is about how you create not only just infrastructure, and infrastructure that doesn't kill ourselves in the future, like our ecology. Some experts want to build a seawall in the Gulf of Thailand, but what does it mean? You have no beach, you have no shrimp, no more shrimp from Thailand, no? Oh my God.
Well, we can't have
yes, we can't have that, right? So many engineer solutions that it's not about one solution fit all. And we don't want to be like the US. We don't want to be like Singapore, not because we can't. We don't have enough resource. Our language is different. We eat differently. We smile differently. We do things differently. The culture, the smell. We smell differently. Sorry, I use this a lot in the judging. Like, I can't smell your design or something like that.
Yeah. Smell was the third most highly used word over the past few days, and all of it used by her.
I don't use I. Yes. But I just feel that at the end of the day, we're still people and we need help. And the only thing that help us from the big disaster or the unknown nature is Thai people helping each other. We can't wait for government. We can help, they help at some extent. But how can we build a healthy community? Sustainability is not about just make the tick on your list, but it's about how we can make our humanity sustain, like here. And I just feel that this is the most strong infrastructure we have to help each other. Yes.
Thank you. I think we've reached the end of our time. We were really enjoying this conversation. I'll just finish by saying the message that I get. We started with a sort of theme of activism. It seems that one of the things that comes through is that we actually need to do good work, meaningful work. We probably need to actually hack the system through design, while remaining within the system, but we need to hack it and game it somehow to be doing some of the beautiful work that you saw and more of it. With that, I just thank our beautiful speakers and I ask you to thank them.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rezai and fellow panelists for the sharing today. I definitely learned a lot about their overseas projects. Hopefully we can draw parallels and learn from their experiences, considering how Singapore is also a very dense urban landscape. So do give us a couple of minutes for a turnover for our next panel session that will be happening very soon. Please just do note that participants who leave during this time will not be allocated your CPD points, okay? So stay here, stay for our next one. I'll see you in a bit. So we will be starting our second panel, and we will be exploring on how design can improve the human experience by bringing about economic transformation, better quality of life, and deeper social connections. So let us welcome Ms. Lekshmy Parameswaran, co-founder of the 𝗘𝘅𝗽𝗶𝗲 in Spain and jury vice chair of the design panel. Lekshmy Parameswaran is an international award-winning designer and care activist who has been working in the area of health and care for over 2 decades. In 2008, she co-founded 𝗘𝘅𝗽𝗶𝗴, a specialist design consultancy working with a wide variety of players and teams within the health and care sectors in different countries such as Singapore, the Netherlands, USA, UK, and Spain. Lekshmy's diverse portfolio of projects in Singapore includes re-envisioning end-of-life and hospice care services in partnership with the Lian Foundation and the 𝗂𝘂𝘀𝗶𝗴 Foundation, collaborating with DesignSingapore Council to design and develop the Design Thinking and Innovation Academy, to train the public and private healthcare sectors, and working with the National Council of Social Service in Singapore to transform the social care sector by empowering the role of caregivers and caregiving. So based on this strategic work, she is currently implementing new care services and programs together with partners 𝗂𝘂𝗀𝗏, Rainbow Center, and the Hospice Care Association. With that introduction, let us welcome Lekshmy, please.
Hi everyone, great to be here. Thank you. I know you're not allowed to leave, but thank you for staying on. So as my introduction, I'm a care activist and service designer, but I just want to mention, especially for this audience, that I also have way back a training in structural engineering and architecture. So hopefully the sharing this morning resonates for you as architects. I know we have a big representation here. So we are the 𝗘𝘅𝗽𝗶𝗴. We are a collaborative network of designers working to transform care and the way that we experience care. Today I want to share a little bit about our overall mission and vision. We're a mission-based practice. I'm based in Barcelona, but we work internationally. And I'd like to focus on one out of our 7 different lines of action. And it's this topic of how do we design to nurture communities of care? And there are a couple of projects that we currently have running here in Singapore that I think can illustrate our approach to this and some of the results and outcomes and challenges that are embedded in such a question. I think it's helpful to maybe start with a definition. So in the Care Lab, we think about care as being made up of compassionate actions. So small moments, interactions between people. Let me give you some examples. A mum or a dad waking up in the middle of the night to feed their child, warm up milk and feed their baby. A young man helping an uncle to carry his shopping and cross the street. Could even be a teacher writing a note of encouragement to a student for the effort that they've put in. So these are small micro interactions, moments where we notice the other person and we respond to them. This is how we define care. And yet, what makes care particularly interesting is that it's a transversal theme. So for many years, we focused our practice only on healthcare. We began that way. And we expanded the definition to really look at care more broadly. So that cuts across the silos that Koch beautifully illustrated for us this morning. It also allows us to use care as a lens that we can look at on a policy level, we can look at it on a community level, we can look at it in organizations, but also within families and within each one of us as individuals. So this broad and rich definition is really what is behind our practice. But here's the tension. When we deliver care, we do so as we manufacture cars. What do I mean by that? So I'm thinking about our care systems, right? Our healthcare systems, our social care systems, our education systems. We approach those with a mindset of productivity. We think about streamlining, cost saving, cost effectiveness, speeding things up. This is what I mean by the factory metaphor. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with working towards efficiency. But when it comes down to care and those human interactions that I described, what ends up happening is all those qualities, those human qualities of care, get lost. And people suffer. So our work at the Care Lab is really focused on bringing back those qualities of care to our systems of care so that we might experience care that is compassionate, equitable, and proactive. So in the last 10 years, I would say, we've been really obsessed with trying to understand different models of care. And I want to introduce a framework that we are currently exploring and playing with. And it's really exploring this bandwidth that moves from institutional-based care through to community-based care. And we have a really strong belief that a shift towards more community-based care is the only way forward. If you look across our societies and our systems, they're buckling under the weight of the demographic shift that the whole world is experiencing around aging. We're also staring in the face crises around mental health. These are all huge burden on each individual society. And there's no way that any government can stem this, can tackle this. And so unless we start to look at how do we move care out from institutions and into the community, I think there's no way forward in terms of a sustainable solution. Plus, within an institutionalized model and that factory mindset, we're losing the qualities of care that make it matter for all of us. And so moving to the community is also, I think, to link on the last discussion, is also a way for us to tap into that deep infrastructure of care that we have between every one of us. So these models, and I hope as architects and urban planners you get excited about this as much as we do. The models over on the left are starting off looking at kind of a center-based setup where you have really the infrastructure, the building itself is where the care is delivered. And as we move towards the right, we start to break that down. So you have, quite traditional settings of home care where professionals from an institution go out to people and take care of them in their homes. But you also have, and great examples here in Singapore, we have the vertical kampong mentioned as an example of this model, which is a purpose-built community to support elderly so that they can age in place. But all of this cluster of ideas here on the right are starting to break down that institutionalized structure and actually connect with the community in very different ways. So you have self-organized circles of care where individuals stay within their homes, but they connect through either digital platforms or have new roles like community coordinators who help to deliver services that might be needed, all the while people being able to stay at home. You also have a really interesting model from Barcelona called Radars, which is a link-up between the community volunteer force and social services, so informal and formal care services working together to support people within, in this case, within a neighborhood to tackle unwanted loneliness. And then over on the far right, you have really a disintegration. You see there's absolutely no buildings in that far right model. It's really about activating a community, in this case the example is to be dementia friendly and dementia aware, and to sensitize the population to be able to live alongside and normalize persons with dementia to the point that they truly understand how to support them in a dignified and natural way in everyday kind of interactions. So I want to maybe talk about two specific models that relate to our work here in Singapore. I'm going to talk about one project which is over on the institutionalized care model as a starting point and looking at how much you can actually achieve in terms of creating communities of care, even when you're within one physical setting. And I'll also talk a little bit about a project that's somewhere in the middle of this bandwidth, where we're working with an institution that wants to expand its services to support people within the community. So its footprint is enlarging, and to look at how to do that in a graceful and empathic and sensitive way. So the first project is called Care Beyond Walls. We're working with the Lian Foundation, with 𝗂𝗂𝗀𝗏, with ILO architects, and with impact evaluators and lobbyists, tri-sector associates. And so let me introduce you to Mr. and Mrs. 𝗂𝗀𝗀𝗏, who live in 𝗂𝗂𝘀𝗁𝗂𝗏. Life before dementia looked a little bit like this. There's their home in the middle here, the HDB, and they would spend time in the 𝗘𝘅𝗽𝗏𝗏, the library, and the mosque. They're going to their relatives' homes in the local park. This is all before Mr. 𝗂𝗀𝗀𝗏 receives a dementia diagnosis. And so the assumption is that his life would shrink, and basically the main journeys that he would take is between his home and the 𝗂𝗂𝗏 daycare center that's in the neighborhood. The point of the project is to actually maintain those connections and relationships and routines and rituals that he and his wife have with the local community. So you see some of the lines in green pointing to interactions between services, not only in the daycare center, but that continue to be within the setting of the community. And so you have the mosque, the library, the kopitiam still playing a role as he learns to live with dementia and as the disease progresses. And it's really about an activation and sensitization of that community through building of partnerships. But I'll get into that in a second. These little icons that popped up is another layer of the project, and it's actually an element of this ecosystem of solutions that has already been launched in the public domain. There was a phase 1 of press and media around this. So the whole vision of the project is to empower persons with dementia and their family in a way that they can continue to contribute within their community. So SF is actually representing a volunteer workforce of persons with dementia who go out to volunteer within the community. So it isn't about just building a network of support, it's also about empowering them and facilitating them to continue to contribute in different ways. So this is the part that's actually been launched at the end of last year, and it's an image from some of the press that was received. Various partners within 𝗂𝘂𝘀𝗶𝗴 have been the first to come on board to collaborate with 𝗂𝗏 and to extend and develop these services together. And so the temple here, Dharma Muneswaran Temple, is one of those partners. You also have Elias Park Primary School, were one of the first early adopters to come in on the project, and 𝗘𝘅𝗽𝗲𝗍 as well, so three partners. And what this might look like typical kind of outreach that you've seen before, but what's innovative in this is the engagement with the temple in this case and the co-creation of the programming and activities that people are able to do and the creation of purposeful work. You know, this is not a distraction or an entertainment. They're able to go there and contribute to the running of the temple. It means that for 𝗂𝗏 staff, the lady in the t-shirt, they are learning how to forge those sorts of partnerships and relationships with the community in order to also educate them about what it means to live with dementia and how they can create a temple that is dementia friendly for that neighborhood. So there's activation happening on multiple levels. Let me jump to the next project that I mentioned, and this is a project with HCA, so the Hospice Care Association, together with Lian Foundation and 𝗘𝗂𝘀𝗁. And we've been looking at the topic of end-of-life care for, it's come up to 10 years this year, and we began that journey here in Singapore. And one of the things that's at the core of our practice and our approach to palliative care and how to support people and families at the end of life is to zoom in and understand the conversation at the end of life. So what you see here are some examples from HCA's new day hospice. It's called Oasis at 𝗏𝘅𝗏. It's within the 𝗏𝘅𝗏 Community Hospital. And these are conversation tools and a conversation room. So this is typically in healthcare called a consultation room, right? We're trying to make a shift from consultation that is transactional and process to conversation that is relational and creates an entirely different space for connecting with people, especially at this challenging and confronting moment in their life. So within the conversation room, you see here, the staff store a number of different tools and triggers. This is a solution called the Wheel of Life that was co-developed with medical social workers, co-developed through the pandemic, by the way, via Zoom, making prototypes, going back and forth. And it's a very, very simple tool with sliders that allow people to present and represent how they're feeling about different aspects of their life, about relationships with family, about pain, physical pain, stress, financial worries. We identified some of the top kind of parameters, you know, the considerations that people might be facing. And so I think the trick here is that this doesn't come with a training manual. This is a tool that social workers are able to use when they feel appropriate. It works for some patients more easily than for others. It's a support, it's a prompt for unpacking and getting to reveal some of the main issues and needs of their clients. But it's not just patients that need support. Organizations that are interested, and HCA are, in transforming their entire culture of care also need to look at how they support their own care teams. So this is a concept called munch and grow. The idea is that teams take a munch break. We love to makan, right? So they take a break to have lunch and to eat together. But while eating, these cards, again, trigger them, prompt them to bring up topics they may be struggling with. So it starts to create a safe space around that ritual of eating together, and with a set of cards that allow them to highlight and celebrate actually some of the achievements they've had as a team. Could be something very, very small, but just allow them to start to talk to one another and support one another in new ways. Because if you don't have a team that is caring for each other, then you deplete the resources of being able to care for clients and for families. So the idea behind Oasis is that it's a space for personal growth for everyone, professionals, families, but also the volunteers that are coming in to spend time there. I see that I'm getting close to time, we're almost there. Aside from these service design elements, tools and rituals that have been developed, we're very conscious of how this service experience is sustained. And so one of the parts of the work was actually to co-create new job descriptions within the care team that will be able to carry forward some of these new behaviors and practices. So the team ninja is a new role that is actually there to link and facilitate some of those team caring practices that I mentioned. First time in the sector, first time in my experience anywhere in the world, HCA now have a service experience officer, which in long-term care is kind of unheard of. We've heard about it in retail, in hospitality. They are experimenting with the best way to bring that into their capabilities. You have social animators and story vitalizers, which are dedicated roles that are there to activate and engage, the clients and the families, and to actually be able to work on that level of conversation in a new way. One story as we were wrapping up this project, we were getting ready to say farewell to the team, and we'd kind of finished our work when the medical director asked us if we wouldn't mind staying with them for another 2 years. Why was that? So I picked this image because this is the area inside of Oasis where they have a garden, a greenhouse. And we discovered a new role that we need to play as designers, as gardeners. It's just because I want to be with Koch and I really want to be a landscape architect. But but truly it's this idea of gardening, of nurturing and accompanying. In Spanish we say acompañar, to walk with people. So over the next 2 years, this is what we're doing. We are walking with them, we are coaching the leadership, we are coaching the service experience team, and we're just a shoulder next to them to learn, but also to be there to encourage and to be there to provide support in terms of staying true to the essence of this work. Their fear was that despite all of the efforts of the whole organization to co-create these solutions, their fear was that they might just screw it up if we walked away, and they really wanted this to land and become the norm and just the way that they deliver care. So that's the journey that we're on. As the Care Lab, I've been mentioning to my fellow jurors all week, it's my first time back in Singapore after the pandemic. I really missed being here. We lived here for a few years. We had a studio in Singapore and in Barcelona, and even though we now don't have a studio here, we're really active. It's a kind of second home. So this is an image of one of our roles that we see in building bridges between Singapore and Barcelona, bringing MOHT over to the City Council in Barcelona to see some of the projects that I just mentioned to you on the community side, and running a webinar inviting Dr. 𝗂𝘀𝗶𝗴h to join us along with other practitioners to talk about communities of care. And there are so many amazing stories here that need to be heard outside of Singapore. I think that's also part of our work, is to connect those dots. And then just to close, a sneak peek, because in the last 5 years, I would say, accelerated by the pandemic, we have been reflecting on our own practice and realized that we are in the middle of a shift. In fact, we've made a shift from people-centered design to care-centered design. And what we mean by that is that we are no longer just trying to solve problems, but we're caring about problems. And when you care about problems, it means you go deeper and you stay longer and in order to see the impact. So our projects are getting longer, more complex, many more partners and disciplines involved, and far more impactful, hopefully, as a result of that. And so I think as designers and architects, another element of this and the activism side of this, to Dr. Rezai's question earlier, is that as a care activist and practicing care-centered design, it's no longer about responding to a brief. It's about sitting down with your partners and defining a shared goal. And that's a whole other dynamic, I think, as professionals, that we need to learn how to practice in that way, because that's ultimately what needs to be done to achieve the results that the impact that we're all working for. So with that, I just want to end. Thank you all for listening and looking forward to questions.
Thank you very much, Lekshmy, for sharing about your initiatives, especially here in Singapore. I want to introduce to you our next speaker, and that will be Mr. 𝗘𝘂𝗀𝗶𝗴, founder and CEO of 8Ing Singapore, also jury member of the design panel. He has over 30 years in design, and as a leader in innovation and branded experience, 8Ing has worked with companies such as Apple, Virgin Atlantic Airways, Nike, Coke, Knoll, and Citibank. The firm takes on an interdisciplinary and holistic approach, working across traditional disciplines, including strategy, architecture, exhibition, interior design, product, communications, and branding. So he really does quite a fair bit. Many projects have received international design awards and have been published across Asia, Europe, and the US. Tim's 11 studios and over 200 strategic designers and business creative connect across 7 time zones in 3 continents. Graduating with honors in environmental design from the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena in 1982, Tim is now a trustee at his alma mater and serves as a chairman of the Academic Affairs Committee. Tim has a book as well. It's called Return on Experience, and that was published in 2021 to reflect on how all human value has been the result of successful design outcomes, and that design is therefore integral to all that we do. Can't wait to hear from you, Tim. Welcome.
Okay, hello everybody. It's good to see you. I think this has been an extraordinary experience for us, and I think one of the interesting things that's coming out of these discussions is that the disciplines that we're traditionally trained in are evolving pretty rapidly. And so hopefully this will give you a little bit of perspective on the way that we think about approaching the design work that we do. As was mentioned, I completed a book a couple years ago called Return on Experience, and it has been the basis of the things that we've learned working now 25 years with Apple and with many other clients, but bringing forward as much as possible the idea of experience that people have with the things you design as one of the core values that you can create. Our business, and it's, I think, pretty much in alignment with many of the things we've heard today, you see a lot of people who are interested in making the world a better place. It's a very ambitious thing to think about doing. You don't know when you're done, and it's difficult to achieve. We like to think about using design as a way to define human progress, that we don't have to make massive changes, we just have to make changes that are about progressing the way we're doing things, how we're behaving, how we're interacting with the client, with the climate, with the environment, etc. So today I'll talk a little bit about experience, and then I'll switch over to sort of illustrate how that creates value. When we talk about designing human experience, you know, how we're trained in school, we look at form, we look at finishes, we look at materials, we look at all of the sort of traditional things. But one of the things that we've developed over the years, and certainly through the work that we did with Steve Jobs at Apple, was the focus on the outcome, the things that, whatever it is that you're producing, what it does for you. And so this is a very important aspect of this, finding the purpose behind your design, because ultimately the form and the finishes are only going to take us so far. And you know, it's becoming a much more complex conversation. The human part is also very important. We've seen many presentations about this, but it's understanding the things that connect us as people. It's also understanding the things that drive behavior, the things that make us engage in ways that we might not otherwise, become advocates of things that we think are positive, positive things to be associated with. So it's very important that we introduce the human part into the design. And then the third part is just this idea, you know, that everybody experiences more things than you actually understand. And it's this experience that really ultimately drives behavior. So if you're looking to improve things, if you're looking to progress things, you have the ability to influence people, you know, in an important way through the way you think about designing an experience. So, you know, what is experience design? It's really starting to express a core set of values that you stand for, and doing it in a way that people can feel that they can feel it and understand it. And it goes back to how we connect as individuals that becomes very important. When we look for the companies that we work for, many times the CEO will come in with a great product that they've been working on, creating a differentiated outcome for, ultimately turn around and put it into the market by looking at their peers and emulating the way their peers do it. And so what happens is, as consumers, as people, we never see the difference. We never see that. So it's very important to think about differentiation in a way. We use the term beware of best practices, which most consultants probably don't tell you. But it's about being something other than everyone else. You don't want to commoditize what you're doing, and you want to focus on the opportunities you have to differentiate. The other part is recognizing that, you know, we all know that word of mouth is a very important thing, but few people recognize that it's experience that really drives word of mouth. So if you're not designing the experience you want people to have, then ultimately you're leaving an opportunity that's untapped, and something that could help impact your business in a significant way. And so when we start to think about impact, obviously in business, you know, you start to look at the metrics. You know, are we increasing sales? Do we have more foot traffic? Do we have more growth? You know, these are all kind of tangible metrics that we want to achieve as from a business perspective. But we have to understand that it's achieving a relationship with the people that you're connecting with will ultimately achieve your financial targets. And if you're able to successfully do this, you're far more likely to to buy or to engage. If you're creating a positive experience, you're going to build greater advocacy, and you're also going to have people forgive you when you screw up and make a mistake. So the second part then is, how do we think about creating value? If we're taking this point of view around experience, how does that really matter? How does it really matter to the users and to the people providing that experience? Venn diagram, I'm sure that everybody is fairly familiar with, but we've added sort of the human, the viable, and the technical part to this. A sort of oversimplification, but a better way to understand it, in our view, is to say, to create value, you have to make things that other people value. That's really what your job should be. And so we can couch it in very complex analytical diagrams, but ultimately it's about making that connection. And the way we think about this is most companies will come to us and have a list of tactics, things that they either want to achieve or methodologies that they think we want to employ. And so you typically start at the tactics level. What we like to do is frame first human outcomes, then determine if you can create a strategy to deliver those outcomes, and then ultimately use the tactics to deliver the strategy for the outcomes. And the point about this is it's just a subtle difference, but it makes a huge difference in terms of de-risking what it is that you're doing. A lot of people talk about, well, I want to try this, I want to try that, but there's a lot of risk involved. If you organize the structure properly, the risk is diminished considerably because the tactics that you're employing ultimately will ladder back up to that outcome that you hope to achieve. So I wanted to use this example. This is something we've been working on for the past few months, and you're kind of getting a preview. We're going to be announcing the finished portion of this in Australia in a couple of weeks. But I thought it was helpful when we start to talk about return on experience, because we're dealing with right now a condition where many companies are struggling with how to get back to the office. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? And it's this idea that the future is more human than you think. It's a nice way of starting, but there are many factors involved in this, which I will jump into. This, just so you know, is the Apple headquarters in Cupertino. We were brought in after Norman Foster had designed the building, and it was near completion. And they asked us, apparently the staff who were working there were saying, yeah, it's a beautiful building, but it doesn't feel like Apple. And everybody was saying, so we really don't want to move. And they just spent billions of dollars building this incredible structure. And so they asked us to come and say, how can we make this like Apple? And ultimately, what we came back to is one of the core touch points that people have with understanding Apple as a company are the retail stores. And so we said, we need to then think about let's put wood furniture, and let's put wood in the building where we can. So we brought wood into the ceilings. We did some changes to the furniture specifications, and simply by sort of carrying that language, it informed the vast Apple team that oh yeah, this is an Apple place. So it was a huge success, which was kind of funny. But anyhow, so if we start at tactics, and this is just an example of that value creation engine structure that I'm talking about. If you talk about tactics, there's probably a lot of us in here who have jobs right now who are looking at reconfiguring the existing space. Companies are resizing, they're looking to move to lower costs, et cetera. This is a pretty common thing. What are they designing in those spaces? People are looking at, how are we increasing relaxation spaces or outdoor spaces? And so these are all tactical solutions, which may or may not work, but we're starting with those in most cases as part of the conversation. And so when we start to look at this, we back it up from tactics to strategy and say, we're dealing with flex spaces and hybrid spaces. What are we really doing here? But it turns out that a majority of companies don't have a detailed hybrid work plan in terms of thinking about how to go back to work and how to successfully deliver an experience for their employees. So pre-pandemic, current state, and what employers are projecting here in terms of what the ratios are fairly significant. The key point here is that if we're starting with strategy and tactics, it's not going to guarantee that you're going to have success. So what's missing? We're missing the human outcomes, and that's ultimately led to probably the greatest transformation in the workforce in our lifetime. But this this has also implications of how disconnected we are between organizations and employee understanding. This is the reason why employers think that people are changing. You know, they're looking for a better job, they want to improve their health, they want to change their compensation. This is what employees say they're missing. And it's very interesting that a big part of this is the human outcome. They're not feeling valued. They're not feeling like they belong to this organization. And so that the type of emphasis that is providing the basis is missing. So when we do the research, you know, this is what we're coming up with. Not many people are feeling very engaged. They're experiencing a lot of stress. Well-being is being compromised, which relates to their health. A lot of people are feeling burned out, and they're rethinking their work-life balance. And so this is all factors that have led to the Great Resignation. But what's interesting is the human outcome here is that they're not feeling engaged, right? They're not experiencing the things that are driving them to connect with their employer and with their you know, their, what is it? Their you know, where they work. So these factors then start to become factors that are criteria for how to think about the design going forward. When we look at the statistics, you know, in the next 3 to 6 months, we're likely to see a pretty significant shift. You know, it's probably terrifying in India at this point in terms of the percentage. What's particularly interesting is that 70% of C-suite is looking at changing. That's a pretty staggering thing when you think about the leadership of all of these organizations shifting. The ones who are the ones who are looking at this, both all employees by age, you start to break it down, and then you look at pandemic hires. So there are a lot of people who are changing jobs and then want to change again. They're not achieving that satisfaction, and again, it's going back to those experiences that they're having in their role. And at the same time, companies are finding it difficult to source for talent. You know, where is the real talent? It's one thing to fill a seat with a body, but when you're starting to look for talent, the competition for talent is clearly increasing. And you know, when we start to look at it by country, this research was done with a focus on Asia region, but it starts to point to a number of countries who are exceeding the global average in that regard. So when we look at this, we're really looking at millions of dollars worth of HR expenses and transitions and you know, everything that is ultimately going to become an expense to the bottom line for companies. And we're also looking at an incredible amount of dissatisfaction that is needing to be addressed through the experience that people have. So these metrics are the kind of metrics that the businesses will look at and want to achieve. And so while we were doing this work, we said, you know, maybe we should look at our company, right? What are the things that we're doing? Because we're having this, you know, the same problem. We have turnover, we have change, and we find in the research that, you know, people, at least in our studio, we look at, you know, much greater recognition of the teams. That's something that's very important. Becoming more involved in what we're doing in terms of the ability to steer and guide the company. Feeling more supported and informed, ultimately more engaged, and hopefully people who will stay together and work in our teams. So ultimately for us, the secret to creating value is really better human experience, and if we're able to do that, we think we have a much better chance of creating something that has impact and is important. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim, for sharing. And of course, last but not least, let us invite Dr. Ming Tan, Founding Executive Director at Tech for Good Institute Singapore, as well as jury member of the design panel for our final sharing. So Dr. Ming Tan is the founder and executive director for the Tech for Good Institute, and she is also concurrently a senior fellow at the Center of Governance and Sustainability at the National University of Singapore. Her research interests lie at the intersection of technology, business, and society, including sustainability as well as innovation. She was previously the managing director of 𝗘𝗂𝗀𝗃 International, which supports Singapore's future growth as a global innovation hub for intellectual property creation, commercialization, and management. Prior to that as well, Dr. Tan was the head of stewardship of the Como Group, a Singaporean portfolio of lifestyle companies operating in 14 different countries worldwide, where our portfolio covered sustainability, brand, and data privacy. And in the not-for-profit space, Dr. Tan is an advisor to the Singapore Tilt Board and serves on the boards of Esplanade Theatres on the Bay, St. Joseph Institution International, and Como Foundation. A very busy person indeed. Let us welcome Dr. Tan.
How we're all feeling a bit tired now. We've had so many amazing presentations, and I don't know, I hope I live up to everything that you've been hearing. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I have one video, so I hope it works later, because it's a really fun video. Today, thank you so much for the kind introduction. I do wear many hats. Today I won't wear my business hat or my ex-government hat. I'm happy to answer questions on some of those issues later. But I'll talk a little bit about the Tech for Good Institute. We were started just over a year ago. We are seed funded by Grab. And our mission is to see how we might leverage the promise of technology to be able to advance inclusive, equitable, and sustainable growth in Southeast Asia, with the knowledge that in many cases technology has been a huge disruptor in societies and communities, so we're very mindful about that. This whole morning has been about how design can bring about economic transformation, better quality of life, and deeper social connections. And at the Tech for Good Institute, we ask exactly those same questions about technology. So I don't have any great projects to show like Tim or Lesh or Koch or any of these others here, but perhaps what I could offer some thoughts on why we should care about tech's role in realizing these shared goals, because we all want them, right? And where tech and design might perhaps inform one another in the digital age. Let me set some context first. I think the economic transformation part is quite, we don't really need to argue with that so much. Every government in the world is looking at digital transformation as part of their post-COVID-19 recovery plans. And by 2030, this region, I call it Southeast Asia 6, so it's the 6 major economies in Southeast Asia, the digital economy is going to grow to $1 trillion. More interestingly, we have 440 million digital users, and they represent the new face of the digital economy. Southeast Asia has leapfrog technology. Very few people come into the digital world on a laptop. For example, we have great mobile penetration. Mobile devices account for about 2/3 of internet traffic in Southeast Asia, which is completely unlike what we call the first generation digital adopters like the US or in Europe. 132% mobile penetration, so most people will have more than one phone. And you take this into account that you still have 50 million people in the region who don't have electricity, and 150 million people who don't have access to the internet, so 132% mobile penetration is pretty amazing. And I think it was Lesh who talked about transfers, right? We think about the digital economy as a vertical, like this is the tech industry, but actually tech is horizontal because you have technologies that's going to touch every part of our lives. An example would be digital payments. Because of the COVID pandemic and people wanting contactless payments, etc., 1 in 2 consumers surveyed by the Tech for Good Institute had adopted mobile payments or digital payments, 90% of them only in the last 2 years. And interestingly, most of them would say they would continue doing so. In addition to scale, I mean, these are really big numbers, but I think one of the other things which is really interesting is how ubiquitous it all is. We talk about the human experience today, and today the human experience is also a technological one. Technology intermediates so much of how we live. And I know we have a lot of architects with us today. I know you're here for your CPD points. But as 𝗂𝗧𝗶𝗲 was saying, here at URA, this is the agency that has the responsibility for making Singapore a great place to live and work and play. And architects and landscape architects and urban planners, you're responsible for how we move through our daily lives, how we perceive our world. And our public spaces really shape the way we think of ourselves as communities, as people, as a society, and even as a nation, right? But in Southeast Asia, if you look at the 16 to 24 years old age group, they're spending 60% of their waking hours online. Are we feeling old? Right? And, have a guess, how many platforms are they on? How many social media platforms are they on regularly? Give me a guess. 5? 7.5. And these are only social media platforms. So this is not the Grab or the your Gojek or your Deliveroo or Panda. These are just the social media platforms, and it's way above the global average. So I would like to propose that the digital world and digital platforms are your new town squares, your new public parks. And within these digital town squares or within these new digital public parks, technology is setting the parameters for human conduct, much as what Marisa was mentioning before. Because decision by products designers really shape how we will express ourselves, for example. For example, we now think that 280 characters is sufficient to express a fully formed opinion, right? And with smartphones and social media, even childhood, is really captured in great detail. It's viewed through a screen. If you don't take a picture of it, it didn't happen, right? So I'd ask you, can you mime taking a photograph? How would you use your hands? How would you mime taking a photograph? Okay, I see some people clicking, all right? And maybe the younger ones might do this. If you ask a 5-year-old, the research has shown, if you say, show me how you take a photograph, they do this. You're taking selfies. That's the definition of taking a photograph. So, Tim mentions experience drives behavior. And their experience is I have to be the main character in my video game, in my world, and that's their behavior. Technology has changed the way we share information about ourselves. We share everything. Personal communication has blurred between the public and private spheres. But really, social media is really just the tip of the iceberg. And I'd like to ask you, if you all put up your hands, right now, if you can all put up your hands. And I'll ask you, how many architects here have worked with installing surveillance or building management systems? Put down your hands. How many of you might have a smartwatch, a Fitbit, or any kind of wearable device? Put down your hand. How many of you here have a device that is linked to your phone or that recognizes any part of your biometric identification, like a thumbprint, like you unlock your phone? Put down your hands. And how many of you have a smart TV in your home where you can actually look at YouTube or something? That's all of us, right? So we are generating huge amounts of personal data that is being shared and stored and sold by third parties. And we leave this trail of digital breadcrumbs through every device and platform that we are sharing, and therefore our definition of privacy is changing. So those architects which are creating private spaces, the definition of privacy, human privacy is changing. And technology is even changing how we remember, right? We take so many photographs, we write so many messages. Every one of you during this presentation, fantastic as these conversations have been, I'm sure you've sent 1 or 2 WhatsApp messages, right? But how do we retrieve when there is so much? Everything gets stashed up in the cloud, right? The way we're curating our own memories is changing. And I think any of you who has tried to find an old Slack message or an old WhatsApp message and been really frustrated about that will remember, will kind of empathize. So the designers of digital products and services have a huge responsibility. They have the ability to make an impact on the human experience as we know it. And now, look, I could have prepared a really positive tech talk. That's kind of my job, like, Tech for Good Institute. But actually, you don't really need me because ChatGPT will help me write the perfect talk on why technology can enable a better human experience. Now, indeed, technology has enabled access, right? And, for example, we did some research, and 7 in 10 people who had used a digital lending product had previously been unable to get a loan from a bank or any other traditional lender. And so for these people, these digital lending consumers, their option was to get a loan from Gojek or 𝗘𝗂𝘀𝗶𝗴h previously, or Grab, or any one of the fintech providers, or a loan shark. That's their option. And it's 25% interest with a loan shark. So yes, increase access. But does improving the human experience mean easier and more efficient? Is that the definition of what a better human experience is? How many of you over the last 5 days have clicked on either recommended for you, or you might like this, or the TikTok has that for you section? How many of you have clicked anything, or a news feed, or your favorite Netflix stream? Be honest, how many of you have clicked it? It's brilliant, right? It's super easy, it's super efficient, it gives you what you want, right? I like horror movies, and therefore I get more horror movies. I like to read about cooking, and so I get more news feeds about cooking. It's really efficient and it's really easy. But does this add and widen our worldview and improve public discourse? If this is the digital town square, the digital park, that's what it should do. So I'd like to share 3 observations on how design as a practice could shape technology and the discourse around innovation. Now, the first is that the design thinking process and tech product development actually share a great deal in common. User centricity or human centricity, I hope we'll get there, Tim. A heavy emphasis on user design, research, usability testing. The beauty about digital products is that it's really easy to do A/B testing the way that you can't with a building necessarily. And this makes tech very effective at achieving specific results. So the question is, to what end? Is the outcome the right outcome before you unleash this superpower? So I'll give one example, which was Grab. Design thinking can help create opportunity. So for example, Grab really looked at what its user experience would look like when they actually found that they had deaf drivers amongst their driver pool. And so, Lesh said, don't just solve the problems, care about the problems first. So they had these focus groups with deaf drivers. The designers and the developers together came to figure out, well, what are the real pain points? And the top concerns that the drivers felt was feeling safe in their own cars, communicating with the passengers, and creating a nice environment in cabin between drivers and passengers. And because you can't turn around to look when you're trying to keep your eyes on the road. So this important step was important to define the problem statement. And so then they iterated on a mix of different solutions. They had a safety dash cam that was in vehicle for safety. The developers disabled the call function. It's kind of small, but it says your driver is deaf and we encourage you to sit in front so they can communicate with you but also keep their eyes on the road. And they also disabled the call function if you're taking, if you've accepted a ride from a deaf driver, but automatically it puts you into chat mode, for example. And then they created a series of flip cards such that it was really easy to communicate with the driver. And so iterations followed, and there were more stakeholders. They partnered with the World Association for the Deaf, Federation of the Deaf, the Singapore Association for the Deaf, and in other countries, the Malaysian Association for the Deaf, etc. And so, Tim, you mentioned outcomes and how to demonstrate impact. The question is, how would you demonstrate impact on this? Of course, happy drivers, happy passengers, but also deaf drivers expressing that, they felt safer in the cars and in a more positive environment, but also by inspiring customers. How come it's not moving? Can we move this forward? I just press that button? Okay, never mind, I'll just talk about it. Where customers saying, oh, this is brilliant, and let me try and bring this into my company. And this was really brilliant when the marketing director of McDonald's Malaysia sat in one of our cars, and now some of these lessons can be moved to other companies where you can begin to see a little bit of a kind of a snowballing effect. Of course, I talked about to what end. To what end are some of these wonderful, capabilities aimed at? We also know that when your goal, for example, oh my God, 3 minutes, so sorry. When my goal is about keeping me on the app for longer, they can be really effective as well. If you've ever sort of been on this infinite scroll of content, and because I am designing to keep you on my app longer, they can be incredibly effective. If the goal is to make me more engaged, then the algorithm will say, bring up more controversial content, because that's what gets the ups and the downs, and that's what increases engagement. And that's why if I'm a teenager on Instagram and I'm looking for healthy recipes, I very quickly can get going, I can sort of get directed to eating disorder content instead. It's because it's more controversial, it keeps me on the on the app. And so technology, or the process of development, is not neutral. And it really can be optimized for the outcome we choose. So we have to be really careful about the outcomes we want to encourage. The second one, I'm going to try and be really fast, is for whom a product or service is being developed. And I really hope this video works. If not, I can talk you through it. The video. It's a soap dispenser. All over. Now, the tone of this was really light, but this is a technical situation, right? The sensor was calibrated to recognize a particular range of shades. This was actually in a Facebook office. So inclusion and removing bias in design has to be front of mind for everybody working in because if you're not a tech designer, you're probably a user, or you're a procurer, or you're a client of tech. And this is really important, as artificial intelligence or machine learning is reliant on the input data. So what you put in determines what you get out, right? And in Singapore, we're a multicultural society. And in our neighborhood of Southeast Asia, we're 655 million people, 100 ethnic groups. We speak more than 1,000 languages. So the available data sets for Southeast Asia may not be fit for purpose, right? And you might say, Ming, this is a situation that every industry has a problem with, right? Every industry has a problem with multiple languages. That's true. But tech companies rely on scale to be able to be even viable. And what that means is that if I build this town square, I need millions of people in this town square. I'm building one town square for millions of people for me to be able to make money. And so they basically align everybody. So tech companies understand this. They're trying really hard to think not just of their current customers, but also their future customers. Google has this the next billion user strategy. So they're betting on the 3 Vs, voice, vernacular, as well as video. But it's really interesting. How many of you within the last 24 hours have typed in a search query? Anything? 1 in 2 Indonesians today search with voice. So that is the new way we're moving forward. So my question is, how might we improve quality of life but still find ways to respect and preserve different ways of life? And I don't have an answer, but I'd love to hear from you. I know I'm out of time. I'll just very quickly dash through a third observation, which is this title series, Creating a Better World by Design. In tech, by design is this big clarion call for values-driven objectives, right? You hear a lot of stuff about data protection by design, security by design. And what does by design mean in this context? It's about being really intentional, thinking about data protection or cybersecurity right at the beginning when you're building product. And it's really sort of a move away from the initial, let's just move really fast, break things, try and prototype something. The idea is, from the very start, is your code something that protects data? Is your code something that makes it cyber secure? And over the last week, I've heard some of these elements or some of this thinking come up in other fields. I think the architects think upfront about embodied carbon emissions as well as the operating carbon emissions. The product designers have talked about right at the beginning, I'm designing for manufacturing so that when this lovely concept ends up being produced, there isn't so much waste. Now, but in tech, this notion of by design is so alluring that it's gone from a principle to a corporate, very aspirational thing, and it's actually enshrined in law. So the General Data Protection's GDPR regulation in Europe actually has data protection by design enshrined in law. In Singapore and in the Philippines, data protection by design is actually part of the guidance from the national data protection agencies. So I'd love to hear what this design community thinks about the way by design is being employed, and thinking about it really about risk mitigation. It's being employed in a risk mitigation situation. How do you feel about by design effectively being just not as an afterthought or not by chance? Because in the past, really all of these things came after a disaster. So my question is, how can by design be more than not as an afterthought? Last slide, I promise. To sum up, designing technology for the human experience, I think, is really urgent when so much of the human experience is intermediated by technology. And in the digital world, creating a better world by design is not necessarily about easier and more efficient, but empowering and enabling people in a safe, in a transparent, and in an inclusive way. And maybe we could do this through the design process if we define the objectives correctly, embedded in the design of systems so we don't get a soap dispenser like that, so that they're really fit for purpose for everyone who it's meant to serve, and by design, with intentionality, to be able to not just deliver great functionality, but also to uphold the values that keeps our society strong and safe. And Marisa mentioned that cities shape our behaviors, but our behaviors can also shape our cities. So I think it's a responsibility not just of the designers and the developers, but ourselves as users, as customers, and by humans, Tim, to actually have that conversation. Because the tech companies are very responsive to their users. And that's the purpose of my institute, the Tech for Good. We don't develop the tech, we let the engineers do that. But what we try to do is to highlight that technology is inherently values-driven. And so we want to create platforms that we can come together to share and debate and listen and advocate for our vision first of the future that we want, so that technology can then enable it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tan. I'd like to invite you to take a seat right at the front. Also, for the rest of our speakers as well, as we'll move on to our final question and answer segment for the day. So all of our panel members from the second session, if you would join Dr. Tan in front, please. And of course, moderating this session is Ms. Liza Chong, CEO of the Index Project in Denmark, as well as jury member of the design panel. So Liza here has been leading the Danish nonprofit foundation since 2018, working to promote and mobilize designs that improve life. The foundation is also behind the Index Award, a prestigious worldwide design prize focused on sustainable and impactful innovation. She is responsible for the organization's vision, strategic and operational direction. Originally from London, Liza has a blended background in strategy, policy, business development, and implementation. Just like before, you will have an opportunity to ask our panelists any questions, so feel free to scan the QR code that you see on the screen right now to submit your questions. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to invite Ms. Liza Chong to kickstart the panel discussion. So Liza, take it away.
Hello? Yes, can you hear me? Well, thank you so much, and thank you to our panelists, fellow jurors. Not only has it been a delight actually spending time intensively the past 3 days, I mean, we've just been brimming with new knowledge, so much inspiration, and it's a wonderful privilege to be here in Singapore. So thank you for your attention, your time. I first of all want to thank you for the presentations, the talk. I've learned so much just these past 2 hours, and I really wish that we had these presentations earlier in the week. But it also sets the scene, the context in terms of having discussion. So I really urge you, QR code maybe, just questions, because I could feel there's an energy in the room for conversation. So I really urge those questions for the panel. But if I might kickstart first question to Lesh, just in terms of what we heard, the focus in terms of the work that you've been doing around care and the caring, sort of like going from a human-centered design to a care-centered design. I mean, I thought that was super eloquent. So of course, with the demographics and the data, with growing human needs within the care sector, it does require scaling. And of course, being sympathetic to needing to respond empathically and responsively. What's your perspective in terms of the challenges, in terms of like scaling the need? Because of course, the growing populace that's actually going to need these care needs. And where are the opportunities? And particularly, I would say, addressing to architects and urban designers here in the room.
Great question. Keeps us awake at night, that one. Sometimes we like to think of it not only in terms of scaling, but using a different term to talk about spreading. Spreading as a way of scaling. And I think the reason for that is we're trying to, and I hope that came across in my talk, we're trying to really connect people and create these communities of care that it's a little bit like the word of mouth. We've seen statistics around word of mouth. I think that was Tim sharing that. This idea of this knock-on effect and a culture change being driven, it's really a social movement, kind of a mechanism. So I think spreading somehow feels like the way that we will reach scale. In order to do that, and thinking about the role of designers and of architects, we need to put our egos to one side, all of us. And we're really being challenged by this within our team and within the conversations with other designers and practitioners. It isn't about us creating all of these things
to make scale, and impact happen. It's also about letting go. So we're in that bandwidth that I showed between infrastructure all the way through to community-based models of care. You really move from hardware, infrastructure, the world of the architects, to software, the world of service designers, like us, all the way through to the community side where I think about humanware. So if we want to make that shift, it's also about designing the conditions for people and communities to thrive and for these cultures and behaviors and attitudes to spread. How do we design the conditions without designing everything for them? So it's about holding back and learning, to not build that building or to not create that tool, or even if you do, to create it as a trigger for a conversation that you don't control and you don't design. So I think we have to learn how to design ourselves out from the picture and provide the conditions for communities to thrive, and that will be how real impact and scale will be achieved.
I love that sort of foregoing the control and the need to sort of in a way constantly sort of build the infrastructure in order to carry our duties of care in a way. There is a question from the audience just segueing into maybe perhaps your background and education here in engineering and architecture, and in what way and how they seem so different and contrasting?
It was a very natural journey for me. Someone said somewhere along this week, I think we were talking about finding your calling. Perhaps it was last night over dinner. No, you said it, right? About having a job and a career and then a calling. I, coming from a Indian family, there was really no option. I really wanted to be a ballet dancer and an actress. That isn't happening. You can be a lawyer, engineer, doctor, right? Anyone familiar with that? So reluctantly, I ended up in engineering, but I wanted to have a much more creative field. So I ended up I wanted to do architecture. So I segued from structural engineering to architecture, and then discovered design. So that was the next chapter. And then through design, I discovered insights research. So that was the next chapter. So I think it's been a process. I'm an innately curious person, and I've been lucky enough to be able to choose things that I'm curious to know more about, and get excited about. And I think that was a very natural journey then from engineering through to becoming a care activist. I think the piece of the engineering and architecture kind of training and background is this appreciation of this scale and approach to design. Also this systems thinking and being able to collaborate, as we do, with architects who take a certain viewpoint, a certain scale of viewpoint, and to then contrast and complement that with a human scale, which you see from the interaction and service design level. When those two can work in harmony, then I think we can really shift things. So really, it's not about disciplines. It's about what you believe in and working together to achieve that.
I'm curious about this conversation about calling. So, I mean, maybe Tim, what was your calling? I mean, of course, your expansive career and the body of work that you showed and presented, I mean, it was also sort of frightful seeing the data and the statistics, particularly in future of work cases that you showed us. I mean, sort of going from something that's sort of very bricks and mortar to actually something that seems very intangible and I think guided by the care. Could you maybe touch on?
Yeah, I think we were talking about the idea of taking a posture, which you mentioned sort of a more humble way of thinking about who we all are and how we can contribute, but the idea that many people maybe start go from their education to their job, and they've achieved their job, so they're sort of happy, and then they start to progress within that job, and they find that maybe this is a career, I can really do this, and then ultimately it's getting to that point where the thing that you're doing, the career that the path you've chosen, starts to become your calling. It's the reason why you exist. But a big part of that is rooted in an idea of everyday learning, the notion that we're consistently learning every day, because you find that path that's going to lead you to something that's going to be much more gratifying than what could have mapped out in sort of a having followed what your parents told you to do in the right way, in order to achieve something. So I think it's that keeping the humility in that we're all consistently looking at lifelong learning as an idea. I ask my kids every day, what did you learn today? Because I want them to think that, about each day as an opportunity for learning something.
And symbiotically, you're learning through them as well. So, I mean, that's
absolutely, of course.
So, a question from the audience for Ming. So, you demonstrated how we transfer our bias to tech. I mean, it was a pretty alarming case, and I mean, equally shocking, but of course, our reaction. How can tech help us avoid this? A tech that recognizes bias and avoids it, is it possible?
Tech can do anything you want it to do, right? You have to ask the right questions. And that's why, for me, the human is always important, because we're the ones who are able to ask the question. So if we say optimize to remove bias, then it will do that. But if you say optimize for efficiency, it will do something else. And I'll give an example, not specifically about bias, but if you devised say in a hospital for a medical record system, and if you devised it for optimum efficiency, then you will actually have very rapid sharing of patient data across all departments. But if you say, and if you say, oh, I want to optimize it for health outcomes, and you will actually be able to share all of that patient data and to be able to match and have the algorithms find connections and matches that maybe even doctors in specific disciplines may not see, but actually you can see comorbidities, etc. But if you actually say, I want you to optimize this to protect patients' privacy and data, you actually immediately get a lot of friction in that process, because it becomes hard to share data, but you've asked it to optimize for something. So if you go to, I don't know how many of you go to NUH, if you go to the wellness center at NUH and you do your regular health checks, and then you then have another doctor there, they might ask you the same question again. And it's because for NUH, they've actually said they've optimized the system to actually sometimes China wall patient data unless you've actually given them permission to do it. So it's all about, as I say, to what end, right? It's us as humans who actually determine it, and as consumers, as patients, as users, as customers, when any chief executive, any C-suite is extremely sensitive to the voice of the customer.
Absolutely. No, I mean, and also in your talk, you quoted the sort of Zuckerberg kind of mantra of sort of moving fast, breaking things. Disruption is just about speed, it's pace. But I often think when I hear that, well, once you've broken the things, who are going to fix it? Who's going to be the person responsible for cleaning up the mess? And sort of, the concern, of course, exponentially when we move at a rapid pace where technology is taking us. I mean, thoughts around responsibility and how do we design sort of like a slower pace?
Well, I'm not a public servant anymore, so I can say, right?
Yeah.
I think the big challenge for governments all over the world is how do you balance keeping society safe, keeping markets stable, and at the same time creating an enabling environment for innovation to thrive? And how do you not clamp down too much to protect society and yet still be open to new ways of doing things and to be able to let innovation emerge? But I'll give an analogy. I talked to some, I listened to some Australian policymakers, and this is a creative team, so how many of you know Canva? right? It's sort of like disrupting the whole Adobe suite, right? You probably hate it, right? Because you think it's too templated. But for many, now they can actually do some basic design. It's fantastic. Of those we know, Canva is an Australian tech product, which not that many people know about. And so this policymaker was saying, I want the I want the Australian tech industry to be known like the Australian beef industry. And like, oh my God, this is tech and agriculture is so far apart. I couldn't see the connections. And she said, look, when someone sees Australian beef on the packet anywhere in the world, they know that the animals were treated humanely. They know that there was a certain level of care taken in the amount of what chemicals it was exposed to, what hormones it was exposed to. They know that the people working in the abattoirs had protective equipment and were not working 12 hours a day. They know all of this just by seeing Australian beef. And they want to be able to see Australian tech as tech that has provenance, tech that actually is responsible, thinks about inclusive values, bias, designing with security in mind, designing with data protection in mind. They have something called BOSE, the Basic Online Safety Expectations, I think is the E. And that's required of any company that is developing tech, that is selling tech in Australia. So yes, governments can do it, and they can, but it's a really, really fine balance, especially for an industry that's moving so fast.
I'm going to come to you, Tim. Question from the audience. So you mentioned something like, how do you know when you're done designing? And therefore avoid undesired over-design. How do you know in yours?
I think, yeah, it is a good question. I think finding, when you're done designing, we try to look at maybe one of the guidelines for that is that you can't add anymore and you can't take away anymore. That you've gotten to an essential need, and in a way it's a sustainability idea, right? You're only using what you need to achieve the whatever the objective of the design is. How do you avoid under design? Keep taking stuff away. And I think you want it not to be, and a lot of people confuse that with being minimal and stylistic and that sort of thing. It's really more about being essential. And I think that good design has a responsibility to be essential, as a part of its role. The other thing I would just say is that, I would love to be anyone in this room, because most of you have a lot of your career, you're in the middle of it, or even just beginning. But the idea that the opportunity we have as designers and architects and things is actually to we're the most comfortable with change, and change is one of the most difficult things that people go through, whether it's losing a loved one, whether it's transition in family or profession, what have you. And we should be the best equipped to help society manage change, to help move through some of these things, and certainly having the empathy and the emphasis on the outcomes and those things is a critical piece to do that. So as you design things, keep in mind that you also have this unique capability and responsibility.
I love that. I think that really sort of encapsulated sort of the overarching sort of nuances in the discussions we've had all week. I think with that, our time is out. I want to thank you, panelists, and also just dear friends and jurors. I think just to kind of round off, I mean, what we heard today was really our duty, and whether you're an architect or designer, I think ultimately we're creators, we're makers, we're builders, and we can be the change transformers in many ways. We have a duty of care and responsibility for equity. we are first and foremost human. We build humanely for humanity. So I think we have to sort of realize where we are in this time, and sort of regardless of what your professions and where the lines blur and are kind of converging, we are here to safeguard and steward this planet for each other and for our future generations. So thank you for your patience. I hope you enjoyed today's talks, and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Liza, and our fellow panelists for the panel discussion today. Shall we give them another round of applause, please? So with that, we have reached the end of PDA 2023 Jurors Forum. We hope that you've enjoyed your time over here and taken away some very insightful points from our panel of experienced design thought leaders. Your feedback is very valuable, so please do take some time to complete the feedback form. You can access this via the QR code shown on screen over here. And of course, to our architects, BOA and SIA members who have kindly stayed until the end of this event, please do fill in the survey form with your details to qualify for your CPD points. On behalf of Design Singapore Council and the Urban Redevelopment Authority, my name is Juliana, and I want to thank you once again for joining us here this Friday now afternoon. Have a great weekend ahead.